When Cassandra, a young midwife, arrived for her regular shift in the labor ward of the hospital, she saw a commotion. A nurse ran past with a pile of linen. Another brought a box. In the changing room, Cassandra asked a shift who was on her way home. "What's all the commotion over there? Everyone running around today?" "It happened that hasn't happened yet," she replied. "The VIP palace is being prepared. Some rich man's daughter is having a baby, so they're putting things in order." "There's always order," Cassandra said, surprised. "It might be orderly for us, but for people like that, you have to make things special. Daddy's already come and looked round, and he's brought the linen and the curtains and told me to replace them with my own." "What's that for? How long is she going to stay here?" "That's the thing, a long time. She's supposed to be over a month away from giving birth. She's supposed to have twins. So the father decided to put her down. You never know. So you better keep your eyes peeled for any gnats that might land on her. That super daddy will blow everyone away. They're bringing the lady in today. Get ready to meet her." "Well, we've never had flies here. We'll take everything else." "What's the big deal?" Cassandra replied and went about her duties. It really didn't bother her much to hear that they would soon have a new woman in labor who needed special attention. It's a natural birth. Twins are not always, but often a special occasion for both mother and children, and it may cause some concern, but here's the girl's personality. Who cares whose daughter she is, or what curtains are hung in our room? Cassandra had grown up in an orphanage and wasn't used to being flattered or special to anyone. She knew that some of her colleagues were angry at the admission of such special patients. Some of them, especially relatives, are afraid of them. But some, on the contrary, are delighted and hope to earn some benefit for themselves by their obsequious behavior. Perhaps they hope to receive a special payment, maybe even a promotion to a higher level. Cassandra could hear one of the nurses talking. That pregnant woman's daddy is some kind of banker or businessman, and he's not married. They say that girls, keep yourself in shape when he comes, and he will probably come often to check on his daughter and see how she is being cared for. None of these questions occupied Cassandra much. When a special patient was brought in, she went out to greet her as usual, friendly and kindly, but without too much favoritism. Besides, the girl was not a young lady at all, but very sweet and simple, not at all trying to put herself above others. Had it not been for the super dad who brought his daughter, she would have been indistinguishable from the usual incoming laboring women. Her name was Margaret, and it was Cassandra who had to escort her into the room. "It's very nice here," Margaret said, folding her hands on her big belly, "and the curtains are so pretty. I hope I'm going to be all right. I'm expecting twins. You know, I'm so scared of childbirth." "Oh, really? It's going to be great. You don't have any problems, as I understand. And our doctors are very attentive and qualified. Besides, twins are not that rare. So it's a common thing for us. Recently, a woman gave birth to a girl and a boy, and everything went very well. I'm sure it won't be worse for you." "What am I going to do in the ward alone? It's boring." "Well, at least there's a telly, it works. And if you have a moment, please come and see me. Because I'm really alone, maybe bored, maybe even scared. So we can chat. Tell me something." Cassandra promised to visit the girl. She wished her a pleasant rest and went to the head doctor's office, where the patient's father, Mr. Winston, had already assembled all the staff. Well, he wasn't exactly the modest type. "I demand that my daughter be given the utmost attention. She must have someone on staff with her at all times. Unfortunately, I can't be here 24 hours a day. I have a job to do, and I'm a man. Margaret has no mother, unfortunately. So I'm relying on you. And be warned, if anything goes wrong, I'll know it was one of you." "This is not the place to talk," said the worried father threateningly. "Margaret is my only daughter, and I will spare no money for her." Everyone from the head doctor to the nurse assured Mr. Winston that his daughter would be fine. They wouldn't let anything bad happen. In fact, their maternity hospital was a model medical facility with the best equipment and the most qualified doctors. So the nurses were looking at each other, fixing their hair and trying to catch the eye of the man they already considered to be an enviable groom. For some reason, he suddenly singled out Cassandra, standing modestly by the door. He looked at her carefully and said, "You, young lady, are a doctor midwife. Very good. Please see to my daughter. It's very important that she has a reliable person by her side at all times. Well, of course, I'll be there on my shift, of course. All our doctors and nurses are excellent. You can trust anyone. You inspire the most confidence in me, the man said. So if you have the opportunity, please give my daughter more attention. And of course, it will all be paid for. When the patient's father was finally escorted out, the head doctor sighed and said to the staff, "Colleagues, such a comrade is not to be trifled with. And by the way, it's not an ordinary case. I think the children will be fine. But I don't like the patient's health. We'll have to do some more examinations and take all measures to prevent any really unpleasant mishaps." "You're lucky, Cassandra," one of the nurses said as they left the room. "What made you trust him in the first place? If everything goes well, they'll thank you for sure." "Well, then I'll owe you cake and champagne," Cassandra said. She thought to herself, "But they in cahoots. Both of them, father and daughter. It's like I don't have any other patients. I can't leave everyone and sit all day with this treasure." However, she did not dislike the patient who was about to give birth to twins. She really hoped it would go smoothly. She didn't want anything to go wrong with Margaret. It wasn't because she was afraid of her father or wanted some kind of reward. It was just that at first sight she had somehow taken a liking to the girl. Meanwhile, the whole staff was discussing both the rich man and his daughter every spare minute. One of the nurses remarked, "Isn't it strange that the father is so excited and no husband in sight? First of all, in my opinion, he should worry about his beloved, or she without a husband somewhere fatting twins. I don't think so. Her father must have found her a good-looking fiancé. She's probably traveling abroad. Rich people do it all the time. They study and work," suggested the nurse. "Why didn't Daddy say anything about it? About his mother?" "No, I even heard that his wife ran away when the daughter was very young. You're such a gossip collector. Should a person like that report to you where her husband is and where her mother is?" The other colleagues dismissed her. Cassandra was also a little surprised by this fact. She had actually started coming into Margaret's room frequently to ask how she was doing, how she was viewing, or just to chat. They had hit it off at once, and both felt drawn to each other. But never once did Margaret mention that she had a husband somewhere out there. She had mentioned some personal difficulties in a half hint of conversation, but she had cut it short, and Cassandra had been hesitant. After all, it was possible that there was some mystery, perhaps even unhappiness, hidden in it. Having such a caring father was great, but it was hardly a substitute for personal happiness. During another night watch, Cassandra noticed something that not only surprised her, but frightened her. Before going to bed, she went into Margaret's room, just to say goodnight as usual. The girl was already in bed, covered with a blanket. She'd switched off the telly and looked ready to go to sleep. "Did I wake you up?" "I just came by to say goodnight and ask if everything was all right," Cassandra said with a smile. "I'm fine, Cassandra. Thank you for caring. I was feeling drowsy, so I decided to go to bed early." "You have a good night, too," Margaret said with a smile. Her wish did not come true. The duty that night was very difficult. Cassandra could not lie down. She could not sit down for a minute. At one point, running from one room to another, she noticed someone leaving the ward, and it couldn't be. No one came out at night, especially since it was probably one of the patients. It was already an alarming signal, because it happened that women who had given birth ran away, leaving their babies and not even writing a cancellation. But at that time, there seemed to be no one capable of such an act in the ward. And women who had just given birth or were about to give birth were not at all inclined to run away. However, Cassandra looked in all the wards. No, all the patients were in place. "I guess it's just me," she thought, and went about her urgent business. She would have forgotten about the incident had she not noticed Margaret slipping into her room in the early morning while the patients were still asleep, and she was filling in the logbook. And then again, out of the corner of her eye, dressed as if she were going out. Now this was serious, and it was hard to write off the incident as something she had imagined. It was already an emergency, given the girl's personality, especially her father's. Cassandra got up to go straight to Margaret, to ask her what was wrong, and to reproach her for risking the health and lives of not only her own children, but also her own, not to mention the fact that the whole staff could be caught for it. And for some reason she didn't go in, didn't ask about anything. When she got home after work, she kept thinking about what made Margaret, no longer just a patient but a close friend, run away from the hospital at night, and how she could help. And then she decided not to guess, but to find out it was the only way she could possibly prevent serious trouble. But it was somehow uncomfortable to ask, i.e., to pry into her private life. The only other option was to follow her when she was away on her next tour of duty. Cassandra said goodnight to Margaret, as she always did, and went about her. This time the watch promised to be a quiet one. Cassandra was not alone. Another midwife was on duty with her, and she had told her that she might be away for an hour on personal business. She didn't go into details, just nodded understandingly. Cassandra settled down at her desk with her head in her hands, so that she could pretend to be asleep when Margaret decided to leave her room. There was no doubt in Cassandra's mind that this would happen, and she kept her eyes on her door. Soon Margaret did indeed come out and looked round and quickly headed for the exit. Cassandra just as quietly, surreptitiously followed. The street was deserted and thankfully dark. It was dark enough to keep the fugitive mare of Margaret out of sight. The latter, by the way, behaved cautiously, like an experienced spy. She walked quickly, also avoiding open places and constantly looking round. So Cassandra had to be on her guard. What a detective, she thought. Let's hope she doesn't get a bad start. It happens. Excitement, fast walking. So much for giving birth in a back alley. That's when the father will be happy and strangle me for paying such attention to his daughter. Just then she saw a dark, intimidating-looking figure emerge from the back alley toward Margaret. Cassandra wanted to scream, to rush to her aid, but she didn't have time. Margaret herself rushed to the man, who looked more like a homeless man or a vagrant. They embraced, kissed, then, holding hands, walked away, sat down on a bench, and began to talk. Cassandra was left to wait in a secluded place. It was still necessary to see when the patient would return, though it was clear. The rich father had forbidden his daughter to date a poor man. But the girl doesn't want to bend up and soon the children will be born. And then what? Maybe Margaret hopes her father will soften after that. Let them be together. Margaret's a good girl, not like her father at all. She got together with some poor bastard and continues to date him no matter what. And then with the children, no doubt, of this tramp. They'll probably run away from home, or their father will forgive them, accept them. They're not strangers. That's what Cassandra thought of this romantic story. Margaret decided not to say anything for the time being. Let things be as they were for the time being, even if it was a fleeting happiness. But having wrested it from cruel fate, what could she, Cassandra, do to help? Nothing, except to turn a blind eye to their dates. But a few days later, things got even more confused. Cassandra overheard Mr. Winston talking to the superintendent. "You'll forgive me for being so demanding, but I'm worried about my daughter. You see, she's the only one I've got, and I'm the only one she's got. There is no mother. Her fiancé disappeared 6 months ago without a trace. A fine young man, businessman from a good family. We loved each other so much. And suddenly, what a nightmare." "What about the police?" exclaimed the superintendent. "Yes, you might say they're not looking for him. That's the whole tale. It's probably the so-called reverse side of the business. He crossed someone's path by youth or stupidity. They found his car somewhere outside of town. That's all. That leaves my Margaret alone. There may be hope, but..." Cassandra was at a loss. She had already painted a slender picture in her mind. And now it turns out that there was also some sort of fiancé, and she and Margaret were in love. And who, then, was this tramp? Whose children are about to be born? And what if the father finds out about this man Margaret is meeting in secret? Cassandra decided not to guess any more, but to ask Margaret directly. In the evening, she went into her room and said without preamble, "I'm sorry, Margaret, but I'm aware of your nocturnal activities. Believe me, I'm not asking out of curiosity, although there is that too. But the important thing is that I and the entire hospital staff are responsible for you." Oh, Cassandra, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I wanted to go out and get some out, so I didn't ask to go. I know you wouldn't let me go. Don't. You can go out in the hospital garden during the day, but at night you're running around the city and meeting someone. If you don't care about doctors, then realize it's dangerous for you and the kids. Who is this man you're running to? Margaret turned away, trying to hide the tears that had returned to her eyes, and Cassandra felt sorry for her. She spoke more softly, sympathetically. And I've told you everything I've seen and heard. I've already written a whole novel. And I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help you. And then suddenly it turns out there was a fiancé. I'm sorry if you think I'm prying, but I probably am. But believe me, it's not just curiosity, it's concern. I believe you. I don't know why, but lately you, Cassandra, are probably the only person I trust. So I'll tell you, the man you saw is Thomas. I've loved him for a long time. He's not homeless. He's not a vagrant. But he doesn't have his own flat now. And he's an orphan. You said you grew up in an orphanage too. Well, you know, they probably gave him a flat after he was discharged. But then some people cheated him. I don't know how, but he was left without a place to live. How he's living in a hostel for workers, practically a barracks. Well, at least he has a roof over his head. He works at a construction site. He has a profession at all. And he's a good man. But you understand there's no hope that my dad will agree to marry me off to him. But I can't live without him. I fell in love. Then I found out we were having a baby. But I didn't realize that there would be two of them at once. And how will you tell your father? And I was scared to even imagine. But he must have guessed it himself. He didn't say anything, but he found me some fiancés from our circle, as they say. Jack, and he said, you'll marry him, that's all. He doesn't talk much at all. Jack didn't mind. He was courting me, and I didn't know what to do. But as luck would have it, it's a sin to say so. But Jack disappeared. They even say he might have died. But I don't really care. And now it's assumed that my children will be Jack's, but they're not. Their father is Thomas. How are you going to tell your father it's not true? And how are you going to live with your lover anyway? Cassandra asked. I don't know. I'll probably confess to my father. But what will he do to me? Will he kill me? And Thomas too, if he throws me out of the house. I'm not afraid of that. I'll leave. We'll live with Thomas and the children if my father doesn't take them away, because you can expect anything from him. But I don't think that's likely. Yes, your dad is a bossy man, but I don't think he's cruel. Especially as he loves you very much. So I wish you'd confess to him. That's easy for you to say, though it's not as hard to do as it seems. You see, it's not that I'm afraid. I don't want to disappoint him. I mean, he's always been both father and mother to me, for he cared for me, hoped for me, made plans for me. I'll probably confess later when the children are born. Perhaps I should have told you sooner. And Margaret, having confessed it, cried helplessly. Will the rich cry too and bring the poor to tears, thought Cassandra, who was deeply moved by the story. Clearly, there was nothing she could do to help, except to sympathize, to comfort her friend. Margaret went into labor a little early. During the examination, it turned out that the girl had a narrow pelvis, and she was prescribed a caesarean, and everything seemed to go quite well. The children, 2 boys, appeared quite healthy, but for the young mother the labor proved to be too hard. She was in a serious condition. Thomas was the first to come to her. How he knew what had happened is unknown. Maybe he sensed it. Luckily, Cassandra was the first to meet him. She recognized him, gave him shoe covers and a dressing gown, and took him to Margaret at her own risk, and left him alone with her. But the lovers didn't have much time to talk. Almost immediately, Mr. Winston rushed into the hospital to be told that he had 2 grandchildren. Bursting into his daughter's room and seeing Thomas, he went into a frenzy. Who the hell is this? Why is he here? Well, let him in. Where's the head doctor? What is this outrage? I'm the father of your grandchildren, Thomas said simply. What else are you going to tell me here? Margaret's father exclaimed. Don't, Dad, said his daughter to him in a weak voice. It's the truth. I've been in love with Thomas for a long time. He's a father. And we never had anything with Jack. I'm sorry. Oh God, he sank powerlessly into a chair. Margaret, you've been deceiving me all this time. What do I do about it now? I don't know, Margaret spoke, evidently out of her last strength. But I'm asking you very much. Don't separate us. I can't live without him. Yes, all right, live with whoever you like, but just live. How are you feeling, daughter? So look, go away for now, all of you. I want to talk to her. And you, Thomas, don't go far away. We'll talk later. Don't worry, there won't be any complaints against you. Father was alone with Margaret, but she was very weak, and their relationship was not long. The daughter, holding his hand and looking pleadingly into his eyes, only had time to apologize for the deception and to say that Thomas was a good but unhappy man. Mr. Winston promised that everything would be all right. Thomas would live with them. Soon the doctor came in and escorted him out. Do anything, any money, as long as she is alive, said the father, seriously alarmed at his daughter's condition. So we are doing everything possible. A professor from another clinic has also been called in. There is hope. Mr. Winston left the room, looked round, saw Thomas. Well, Pops, congratulations. Yes, Margaret has confessed to me. It's a pity it wasn't sooner. However, what's to say about that? I hope all will be well with you. I want you to come home with me. Where will I put you? We'll make a man out of you. Thomas went to his sweetheart's house, and Mr. Winston kept his promise. He found out what problems prevented his future son-in-law from leading a normal life, began to restore his documents, got him a job. Although his main concern was, of course, his daughter. He constantly kept in touch with the hospital, worried and hoped for the best. He didn't even tell anyone that Jack had been found. He hadn't died, hadn't even disappeared anywhere. The whole thing was an imitation of some kind of tragedy. Mr. Winston, not yet knowing that Jack had nothing to do with his grandchildren, hired a detective who was able to find the groom. It turned out that he had disappeared for a reason, but had taken a substantial sum of money from his future father-in-law and disappeared with it. He was a gambler. He'd run up huge debts. He hoped to win back, lost everything, and now had to hide in a neighboring town. Turns out he wasn't a businessman either. His parents were quite wealthy people, but they died, and their offspring rather quickly squandered all the fortune. By marrying Margaret, he hoped to improve his situation, but he ruined it for good. It's too late for that. Mr. Winston thought of punishing the deceiver. But then Margaret's misfortune happened, and they had no time for that. A few days later, despite the best efforts of the doctors, the young mother died. Mr. Winston, unable to come to terms with the terrible grief, hired independent experts who found that the doctors were not at fault. That is, there was no one to punish. Weep for your daughter and move on with your life, the expert told him. I realized that after what happened, this is almost impossible. But still rejoice in the fact that you have been given 2 wonderful grandchildren to take care of. Yes, of course, said the grief-stricken grandfather. After Margaret's funeral, her twin children, Michael and David, were moved into his home. Mr. Winston approached Cassandra and said, I know Margaret came closest to you, and, as I said, you inspire confidence in me as well. Would you be willing to move into my home and be a nanny for my grandchildren? You have a medical degree, good experience, and you already know the children. Where else would I find such a nanny? Everything will be new to them. I have a job. Cassandra was surprised, and she liked the offer. She felt that by caring for Margaret's newborn, she would be doing one last favor for a late friend. So you quit your job. I'll tell the head doctor not to torture you with time off work. And don't worry about the salary. It will be much higher than what you get now. All you'll have to do is look after the children. You won't have to run the household. I've got a good housekeeper who does a great job. But 2 babies is just too much for her to handle. Cassandra agreed, and not because of the salary. And since she had to look after the twins around the clock, she moved into Mr. Winston's house, and Thomas lived there too. He'd already got a good job. He had proved himself well, and was no longer recognizable as the vagabond of yesterday. Back home, he was always with the children, learning from Cassandra. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he asked. I just want to be a good father to my children. I never knew my mother myself, and I understand how hard it is to live without parents. At least let them have a father. When they found out that Cassandra was also from the orphanage, they talked a lot about their past. Neither remembered her parents, although Cassandra had been in the orphanage when she was 2 years old and knew from the stories of her carers that her mother had abandoned her. Thomas, on the other hand, knew nothing about himself at all. I was given my first and last name at the orphanage, so I have foundling don't even have a chance to find my parents. Have you ever tried to find your mom? When I was little, I was very worried. I didn't understand why my mom did this to me. And when I grew up, I decided there was no point. If she refused, she refused. And for what reason? That's pretty obvious. I wasn't wanted. And I suppose she wanted to get married, or something like that. Why should I know that? It's clear enough. Since she was such a woman, perhaps I'm lucky I refused at all. Otherwise, I'd have got rid of her when I was pregnant. In the orphanage, well, I can't say it was bad. I was able to study, get a good profession. And with a mother like that, I don't know what would have happened to me, Cassandra replied. 6 months passed after Margaret's death. The pain of loss had not quite subsided, but had dulled, especially since there was always someone to distract herself with. David and Michael grew up to be wonderful children. Every day they delighted their grandfather, their father, and their nanny with new achievements. Cassandra, often talking to Thomas, had already realized that a new feeling had awakened in her heart, but she did not let it go. Margaret had only recently passed away. How could anyone think of taking her place? And after realizing that Thomas had a thing for her too, the girl thought about leaving this house. But how could she leave the little ones? One day, Mr. Winston was visited by his business partner from out of town. The host organized a dinner party, to which Thomas and Cassandra were invited, almost as relatives. And then the unexplainable happened. On seeing Thomas, the guest suddenly turned pale, and when he woke up, he exclaimed in amazement, "Arthur." "I am Thomas," replied the young man, understanding nothing. Mr. Winston was also puzzled. The guest, after puffing a little and recovering from his astonishment, began his story. It turned out that Thomas was an exact replica of his nephew Arthur, who had recently died in a car accident. It couldn't have been a coincidence, but there was no mysticism about it either. It was explained quite simply. Arthur was also one of a pair of twins. But it was still after they were born right away that it happened. The culprit, I believe, is Ben, my brother, the father of the twins. He had a mistress. I don't know how he came up with it. A young, beautiful wife. And this mistress hoped to marry him, but he wouldn't. Though he must have promised, lied about something. In short, the story is banal. And this mistress finds out that his wife is not sick at all, and he is not going to break up with her. Moreover, she's pregnant. And then it starts. First the woman went crazy. I don't know, maybe she's always been like that. At first she just spoilt their lives. She called, came, made scandals, hysterics. Anyway, they put her in a psychiatric hospital. But not for long, because apparently she wasn't that crazy. She was released just as the twins were born. And somehow she managed to kidnap one of them and escaped with him. Of course they looked for her and the baby, but they never found her. They found her a year later. But she was dead, jumped off a bridge. And where did she take the child? We don't know. They thought she must have killed her. But we didn't really settle down, we just accepted it. There's only one son left, Arthur. And you, Thomas, must be the other one. That psychopathic woman couldn't bear to kill a child. She put him in an orphanage. Yes, I was abandoned, as the story goes. Then there was no note, nothing. So there was no chance of finding the parents. Not now either, because Arthur died with them. It was a terrible accident. Besides them, 4 others are gone, Thomas replied. And the brother and his wife and nephew were the only relatives. Except for his wife and 2 sons. But the brother is still part of my family. At least I have a nephew now. After this was learned, business negotiations were out of the question. I had to figure out how to deal with Thomas. It turned out that he was not only the son of the dead businessmen, but also the heir to their considerable fortune. Mr. Winston was astonished. He thought he'd taken in a homeless, almost homeless man. Turns out he's the son of such men, his partner's nephew, and possibly a wealthy heir. We'll have to document all this, of course. We'll have to take some tests for that. But a DNA test is no problem. I'm not going to betray my brother's memory, and I'll give him everything his son is entitled to. And I'll introduce you, Thomas, to my family, so you are the closest relative we have. Now it was Thomas's turn to marvel. Who would have thought it? So I have an uncle, some cousins. I never imagined such a thing. I thought I'd never know who I was or where I came from, and now I'll know something about my mom and dad. Turns out I wasn't abandoned. What do you mean abandoned? They remembered you till the last day of your life, but they never hoped to find you. It's a pity they died without knowing anything. Will you go to town with your uncle now? Will you live there? Mr. Winston asked. Oh no, will you? Where am I going to go? I have a family here, a job, children, objected Thomas, while looking at Cassandra. Now, of course, I'll go to the graves and meet your family, but not right away. Everyone was surprised to congratulate Thomas on finding his family. Cassandra rejoiced too, though she was saddened too. Lucky you, Thomas, she said when it was just the two of them the next day, and I don't seem to be getting anything like that. How shall I put it? Lucky, no parents. No brother either. Of course, I'm glad that I have relatives, that I can at least find out about my mom and dad, but I can't live near them. I mean, we can't see each other often. I can't leave the children. Take them away from Mr. Winston. I can't. And away from you, Cassandra. He took the girl's hand, but she yanked it back and stopped him. Don't, Thomas, and glanced at Margaret's portrait with the mourning ribbon. Thomas understood, embarrassed. And when Cassandra came out, he looked at the lovely face for a long time and thought, I'm sorry, my love, you're in the past, and we're moving on with our lives. I will never forget you. Our children won't allow it, but life goes on. In the evening, Cassandra tucked the little ones in, made sure everything was in order, and with a clear conscience went to bed. It had been a tiring day, so she couldn't even read. As soon as I opened the book, I felt my eyes closing and sleep taking over. However, it was not possible to fall asleep soundly enough. Her sleep was professionally responsive, and Cassandra heard the twins cry. The cry was not hungry or cranky, but frightened. What happened to them in there? She thought anxiously and jumped up, throwing on her dressing gown. And what she saw in the nursery chased away the remnants of sleep. Some obviously unfamiliar person was placing the babies in a carrier. What are you doing? Stop, she shouted, not afraid to scare the children. The most important thing in this situation was to save them, probably from their captor. Cassandra rushed towards him, intending not to let the infants be carried away. But the unknown man wasn't about to give up either. He turned and quietly whispered something under his breath, then swung his fist at the fleeing girl's jaw. The Cassandra staggered, but managed to stay on her feet. Realizing that she couldn't do it alone, and the intruder's intentions were serious, she screamed with all her might. Help! Thomas, Mr. Winston, Lucy, called the police. Shut up, the man shouted at the top of his voice. He grabbed a desk lamp off the table and swung it at Cassandra. Apparently he wanted to hit her in the head, but she dodged. The blow slid across her shoulder, tearing the sleeve of her dressing gown and probably hurting her skin. But the girl didn't care about that. The main thing was to save the children. The kidnapper in the process of the scuffle moved away from them, and she stood between him and the carrier, in which the babies were already lying, frightened, screaming because of the commotion. And from the corridor came shouting and stomping. Help arrived just in time. Both men ran into the room at the same time shouting. What happened? What happened to the children? Cassandra, who is it? What a surprise, Jack. A new name was shouted by Mr. Winston, who recognized the kidnapper after they had already twisted him. It's Margaret's ex-fiancés, said the landlord in astonishment. What are you doing here, you scoundrel? Why are you here? And then Lucy came up, and all three of them stared in amazement at the man who was about to kidnap the little ones. He, however, annoyed that the plan had failed, replied angrily. I am here because I was going to take my children. They are mine and have nothing to do with you. You kidnapped them, killed my fiancée, and I want to claim them for myself. I see. Hello, Jack. What a surprise. Where the hell did you come from? And why do you suddenly want kids that aren't yours, you bastard? Their father is in this room. But it isn't you, said Mr. Winston. Damn you, you old fool. The bandit suddenly calmed down and even grinned in the face of his frustrated father-in-law. Thought you wouldn't recognize them, would have adopted them. Then I'd have given them to you, reissued custody, but not for nothing, for money, because I need them. I see. It's clear to me that you're a scoundrel of the highest order. And why a scoundrel? The children could be mine. Why not? And anyway, before you judge me, you should look at yourself. Smart guy, he wanted to foist his pregnant daughter on me. That's the way it goes, enterprising dad. You'd better shut up, you rascal. While this conversation was going on, Thomas and Cassandra tried to calm the children down. "Oh, Cassandra, you're covered in blood. He hurt you," the housekeeper finally exclaimed, noticing that Cassandra was bleeding from her broken lip and from her shoulder as well. "Still needs to be treated, bandaged." "It's nothing. It doesn't even hurt," Cassandra waved it off. It was only then that she noticed that the entire sleeve of her dressing gown was soaked with blood, which was already beginning to drip onto the floor. Thomas and Lucy tried to administer first aid, but the bandit didn't care about that at all. He was interested in another matter. "And so it's okay. I didn't steal anyone. I can go in peace. I hope nobody's going to call the police. And there was nothing wrong with the shouting either. I just punched her a couple of times. She attacked me." "Well, am I going to go?" "We're not going anywhere. You'll answer for everything. For the kidnapping, and for those couple of times Mr. Winston sieged him. And you, Cassandra, really need to get your wounds treated." "Wait a minute. What's wrong with your arm?" "Is that a knife wound?" Mr. Winston pulled his dressing gown down off his shoulder, examining Cassandra's wound. "Oh, it's nothing. It's a scratch, really a deep one. That's why there's probably a lot of blood." Lucy was already flapping around her, wiping away the blood with a towel. And Mr. Winston was suddenly acting very strangely, and even frightened the girl. He came closer to her, pulled his dressing gown off his shoulder, and asked, jabbing his finger at her back, "What's that you've got there?" "Where?" Cassandra replied in amazement, not realizing what other wound had caught his attention. "But there's a spot on my back, closer to my shoulder." Thomas approached as well, examining the girl. "Yeah, I think it's just a birthmark. No wound," he said. "It's unusual though, it looks like a heart." "Well, yes, it's my birthmark and it's always been there." "What is it?" Cassandra didn't understand. "What's special is that my wife had the exact same one, and so did my daughter." "Didn't you notice it, Cassandra? You saw Margaret, didn't you?" "Don't know, I haven't noticed it. I haven't had a chance to look at her back." Cassandra really didn't understand what was going on. "No, I'm sorry. And this whole thing can't be called an accident. I've never seen spots like that on anyone else. You say you grew up in an orphanage. Have you ever seen your mother?" "I've seen her, but she gave me up when I was only 2. I don't remember her face, not to mention any stains." "And what do you think?" She couldn't believe her ears. "I don't know, Cassandra. I don't know anything. But it's something we need to find out." Mr. Winston was concentrating. "Do you need an ambulance?" "Why would I? I'll just put a band-aid on it, and it'll go away." "My teeth seem to be intact," Cassandra reassured the children. There was hardly any blood coming from her arm. No need for the police either. "Had a badge," the thug added. "And a bonus to you for kidnapping children. Do you realize what article that is?" Mr. Winston was indignant. "I do. That's why I'm asking you not to summon anyone." "What have I gained you? You were the reason I ran away, by the way, because you were demanding a debt from me. So Margaret didn't want to marry me. She said so herself, so I've been suffering with you two all this time. And I wasn't going to do anything bad to the children. I would have brought them back. What do I need those screaming babies for?" "You're the one who's going to figure it out. The babies are fine. Lucy will bandage her up, then calm the babies down somehow. And you, get up, let's go." Mr. Winston turned to Thomas. "Keep an eye on him, lest he run away." That was not Mr. Winston's concern at the moment, however. Indeed, this Jack had done their family a great deal of mischief, and it was necessary to consider what to do with him next. But he didn't want to. He was preoccupied with something else, the birthmark of a rather unusual shape, and the fate of his wife, once many years ago. He hadn't done much searching for her. Firstly, there were no such opportunities then, and secondly, there was no time and special desire too. Everything was clear enough. She ran off with another man, abandoned her daughter. Why did he need such a woman? Even if he had found her, no relationship could be established. And to meet Margaret, to throw some accusation in her face, he didn't care about that at all. Now, for some reason, he wanted to find her. Mostly to ask about Cassandra, but he couldn't do it himself, so the next day he went back to the private detective, who would help him track down Now Mr. Winston asked him to track down the woman who had long ago abandoned him. Strangely enough, this proved easier than one might have expected. The detective soon informed him that Annie lived not so far from him in a neighboring state, and strangely enough, had been working at the church there for quite some time. So Mr. Winston, of course, was surprised and decided to go after all, to see the one he had once loved so much, and to ask a question not seemingly related to their past. No one answered the doorbell. He went to the church, where he asked the woman in the local shop how to find Annie. She pointed him to the cleaning lady. If he'd met her on the street, he'd never have recognized her. There was nothing left of her former beauty. Annie had long since looked much older than her years, to a poorly dressed, modest elderly woman in a dark headscarf, naturally without any trace of makeup, and without the slightest attempt to beautify herself. "Hello, Annie," he said sadly, walking up to her. "Winston," Annie exclaimed in surprise, and even staggered slightly, pressing her hand to her heart. "Yes, it's me. Wanted to talk to you. I don't know if you'll want to. I just have a few questions for you." "Yeah, sure," Annie mumbled confusedly, rubbing the edge of her dark blouse. "Come on, let's go outside and sit over there. There are benches." "I have a major question for you, Annie. We don't really have anything to talk about. What's happened is long gone. I want to ask you this. Did you have any other daughters besides Margaret?" "What?" Annie asked in astonishment. "Where do you come from?" "Yes, I did," she replied meekly. "You're right. Of course, nothing connects us anymore, and there can't be anything in common between us. What is there to hide now? I had a little daughter, Cassandra, not yet 2 years old when you and I met. But you remember how I had a crush on you and wanted to marry you more than anything. I thought it would secure my fate. How could I tell you I had a daughter? You would have rejected me right away. Such an eligible suitor. So I took her to an orphanage. I thought it was just for a while. Then, when we get married, I'll confess, I'll take her back sometime. And then, you see how it turned out. Well, not only did you not take Cassandra, you left Margaret behind. I'm sorry, Pasha. It's just the way it turned out. I was a young fool. I met another man, thought he was even richer than you, so I ran after him. And I've already hidden 2 daughters from him." "Well, yes," asked Mr. Winston gloomily. "It was even easier with Margaret. I mean, she stayed with you with her father, and that man knew I was married. He didn't know about the children. And you see, I didn't get any happiness there either. I got bored with my lover and he left me. And I didn't realize then that I had lost my real happiness when I left my daughters. I went looking for something again. That's what I was looking for. Now I go to pray for my sins. I didn't leave my children anywhere else, because you know how unexpected things can happen. I met your first daughter by chance, and you needn't ask me. I'm sorry, but it's no longer your business. And don't ask about Margaret, and don't ask about me. She's gone and gone from our lives." "No, she didn't leave again. There were no more children." She pulled her kerchief from her head and ducked her face into it. Mr. Winston sat for a while, looking at the shuddering thin shoulders, at the gray, stray hair of his former lover. He got up to leave, but sank back on the bench. But not because he had anything to say. He just didn't know what else to say for the last time. He didn't want to leave like this. Annie took the kerchief away from her face, put it on the bench between herself and Mr. Winston, and said, "You're right. It's nobody else's business. I've gone off on my own, left everything behind. Why should I bother other people now? That's what my father told me in confession. Don't. I was young, healthy, beautiful, and they didn't need me. Why should I impose myself on anyone now? Go on, go on. I'm sure they'll be happy with you. And me? Well, I'm fine. I live quietly, peacefully. That's fine. I'm sorry I shouldn't have come, of course. But with that question about the other daughter, no one would have answered it but me. Well, goodbye then. Have a nice day." Annie, without looking at him, muttered some words of farewell, crossed him on the back, rose, tied her kerchief again, and went away. Mr. Winston, on the way home, thought that perhaps Margaret's death should have been told too. She must still be thinking her daughter was alive, praying for her health. Maybe I was right not to tell her. Let her think she's happy. Maybe she should have helped herself. You can see she's poor. It's not just poor, it's practically miserable. How could I help her, though? She wouldn't take money. You can see from her that she has completely different values now. That's how life has taught her. When he got home, he didn't tell Cassandra anything about the meeting. but furtively took a few hairs from her and the twins and then gave them to the lab for DNA testing. The results of the test clearly confirmed Cassandra's close relationship to the children. Mr. Winston had no doubts about that. But after receiving the confirmation, he decided not to hide it from Cassandra and told her everything. I'm surprised I didn't realize it myself when Margaret was alive. You're just like her, and yet you're so close, so friendly. You must have felt some kind of kinship. So Cassandra, you're like a daughter to me now. My grandchildren's own aunt, after all. So stay with me no longer as a nanny, but as my own person. We're all family, no matter how you put it. God, I've never been happier than I am right now, she murmured, covering her face with her hands. I have family. I really loved Michael and David as my own, didn't I? And I did feel something for them, and for Margaret, but I didn't dare believe it. It's like that in our orphanage. They make friends with someone and think they're their sister or brother. Many children invented some kind of kinship for themselves. I didn't do it, I didn't think it was right, and now it turns out that I don't need to invent anything. I had my own sister next to me, and I didn't know it. Well, now you do. So stay, Cassandra. Will you be in Margaret's place for us? Thank you, Mr. Winston. You are an extraordinary man. You and Thomas have also taken me in now, haven't you? You've changed our lives. Oh, come on. That's just the way fate turns, and it has nothing to do with my being ordinary or extraordinary. And Mr. Winston remembered Annie again. Yes, he had accepted and even loved people who had not long ago been strangers to him, but for some reason he had not accepted her. Not because he could not forgive her. He had let it go long ago, but he thought it was better for her to stay in the state she was in. She'd said so herself. But now he hesitated, and he couldn't bear to confess. Mrs. Sandra, I found your mother with Margaret. I wanted to ask her first if she had a daughter before she met me. And he recounted the encounter in detail. Now you're wondering whether you should get on with her or not. Ah, I don't know. I forgot about that situation a long time ago. I let it go. I never thought about looking for my mother. I thought I could find her. But then what? Talking to her seems to be completely uninteresting and about nothing. Besides, she could turn out to be such a person that later you would not know how to get rid of her. We orphanages had such cases. Normal people don't give up their children. And now, I think I know where she is, and I don't care. That's bad, I guess. I had the same thoughts myself. I think I forgave her a long time ago, didn't remember her. Even now, I don't think I have any feelings either. But something bothers me. Although she says that everything is fine, she's happy with her life. But I see what kind of life it is, and I do not know what to do. And most importantly, to understand whether she needs all this. Meeting, communication, she said she doesn't need it. But I can tell she's lonely. Okay, we'll wait. Maybe some answer will come. She's got her own life, we've got ours. I'm more interested in what's going on with you and Thomas. I can see that you two are attracted to each other. Mr. Winston changed the subject. Cassandra, hearing his words, smiled embarrassedly and blushed. Is it noticeable? She asked in surprise. You bet it is. It's not clear what you're trying to hide. Both of you are free adults. If you love each other, why not be together? Time, Cassandra, is running fast. Why waste it on some unnecessary secrets? Besides, you two aren't strangers. You have a home, a job, a future. I was uncomfortable with Thomas in front of you too. I mean, he was sort of with Margaret. She's your daughter. How silly is that? If Margaret were alive, yes, that's an argument. But now, from that day on, Cassandra and Thomas really stopped hiding from others. So when the children were a year old, did they announce that they had decided to marry. Mr. Winston gave his fatherly blessing to their union, and they began to prepare for the wedding. Maybe I should invite my mum to the wedding, Cassandra asked her named father one day. Nothing against that at all. I doubt she'll come, though. You know, maybe you could visit her first. Meet her there and ask. Cassandra drove down. For a long time she looked from the side at the woman who had once given birth to her, hesitating to get any closer. Finally plucking up the courage, she approached. Hello, I'm Cassandra. Annie clutched at her heart, almost fell over on the spot. Her daughter was there in time to pick her up. They chatted for a long time that day, each of them feeling warmer after the separation. On the day of the wedding, Annie was in the place of honor among the guests. Cassandra often came to visit her mother and her grandchildren from then on. I've had enough of your sluggish Vanka, objected by disgruntled wife.mp4. Caroline and Michael had known each other since high school. The young man was a few years older, so at that time he didn't consider her a young schoolgirl at all. Caroline, on the other hand, looked at him every time she saw him. Once she even dared to confess her feelings to him. Michael was very pleased by this act, but it did not cause any mutual feelings. He did not take Caroline's words seriously, as he thought it was just a childish crush. At that time, Caroline considered herself a very mature girl, who was in the 8th grade at that time. She believed that she and Michael had a small age difference, and somewhere in her heart she hoped that he would invite her to his graduation. However, time passed, and the young man still continued to remain silent. And then Caroline decided to come to his graduation on her own in the hope that when he saw her, his heart would immediately inflame with love. Then she packed like it was her prom night. She spent all her saved money on a new dress that would resemble a princess dress. A classmate had given her beautiful hair and makeup. Even though Caroline was in 8th grade, she already looked like a beautiful formed woman. Her breasts and hips were rounded and her waist was slim. When Caroline put on her dress and walked up to the mirror, she couldn't take her eyes off herself. The red silk floor-length dress with open shoulders sat perfectly on her figure. Brown curls fell over her shoulders and chest. Her friend paid special attention to Caroline's eyes. She decided to emphasize them with such a makeup technique as smoky eye. This look made Caroline feel a little more grown up. She no longer looked like a little girl. In front of the mirror stood a beautiful young woman. When it was time to go out, Caroline felt a little nervous, so she decided to take her friend Emma with her, who did her makeup and hair. The girls walked to school holding hands. Emma kept telling Caroline that she looked ravishing, and today she would get her Michael. At the school, the girls saw a huge number of people who had gathered to watch the graduation farewell number. The girls' classmates and parents were there. Caroline didn't care who was around her. Her eyes were constantly on the lookout for Michael. She wanted him to see her as soon as possible and give her a few compliments. When the girl realized that her lover was nowhere to be found, she decided to go around the school. She knew that high school students gathered around the corner to smoke. That's where she headed. As she neared the corner of the building, she saw Michael with his strong, masculine arms around some girl she didn't know. Could it be a sister? No, it can't be. Never would a brother hug his sister like that. And what does he see in her? Why doesn't he notice me at all? Who have I been trying for? Caroline thought. The girl didn't know what she should do. On the one hand, she really wanted to appear from around the corner, to come up to Michael, to congratulate him on graduation. But on the other hand, she realized that she wouldn't be welcome. The two of them had run away from everyone to cuddle here. So they didn't want to see anyone. Tears came to her eyes, and there was such a squeezing feeling in her chest that it was very hard to breathe. Caroline couldn't do anything about her emotions, so she picked up the hem of her dress in her hands and ran out of the schoolyard as fast as she could. At this time, Emma stood in the square and searched for her friend with her eyes. Emma, at some point, even started to feel worried because her friend had been gone for quite a long time. In the distance, she saw the silhouette of Caroline running as hard as she could. Fear lurked inside that something was wrong, and Emma ran after her. Caroline. Wait, Emma shouted at the top of her voice. Stop, I said. The girl grabbed Caroline's arm, turning around to face her. What happened? Nothing. It's just business as usual, Emma said in a frustrated voice. I don't understand why I thought Michael would ever pay attention to me. What makes you think that? Maybe because you're a very pretty girl, Emma said. Tell me what happened. I was just looking for him. I remembered that he and the boys often went behind the school to smoke. When I got to the corner, I saw him hugging some girl. You know, it's just some other girl. Why her and not me? I'm always in front of him, trying to look pretty. I even confessed my feelings to him. He couldn't even take it seriously. Tell me, do I look like I'm joking? First of all, Caroline, there's nothing wrong with you. I never thought your feelings for Michael could be fake or a joke. If you didn't realize that, then you have to think about the fact that he's a fool. Well, only a fool would miss a girl like you. Secondly, I can only assume that Michael didn't take you seriously because we're 3 years younger. Maybe when we're 25 and he's 28, the difference won't be so obvious. I'm asking you not to feel bad, because there will be men in our lives that Michael can't even match. Don't you dare say that. You don't know him at all. Do you know what a kind, sweet, decent, funny, strong, manly man he is? I could go on and on about him forever. You can talk about him your whole life, but it won't change the fact that he's cuddling with some girl right now, Emma said, realizing that the words would hurt her friend. Caroline's face changed instantly, and tears came to her eyes again. She felt like Emma had betrayed her. If they were true friends, she wouldn't have done this and would have continued to support Caroline all the way until Michael was hers forever. But instead, her friend talks about how the young man is not worthy of her love. How can you say that about people you don't know at all? Caroline couldn't understand it at all. There was nothing to do, so the friends packed up and went home. On the way, they discussed plans for the evening. Emma didn't want to leave her friend alone with bad thoughts, so she offered to go home with her. Caroline accepted the offer. The girls entered the flat. Emma immediately went to the bathroom to wash off her holiday makeup and get rid of her hair, which reminded her of today's mishap. As soon as Caroline transformed from a beautiful girl to a young wench, she and Emma went straight to the cafe to really devour the ice cream. Despite this, it had been a lovely evening. Caroline was constantly dangling in the clouds and thinking about how she would go on without her lover, knowing that he was in love with some other girl. For about a fortnight, Caroline had been constantly thinking about Michael. It couldn't be said that she enjoyed suffering. In her dreams, she imagined the young man coming into her room in the middle of the night, lying down in bed and holding her in his arms. On top of that, she constantly had dreams in which Michael would whisper his love to her, talk about how beautiful she was, and make excuses about those hugs with the girl. Caroline wanted it to be that way. She had seen her lover a few times at the mall, and when she had said hello to him, she had heard a short, "Hey babe," in response. After saying that, she wanted to cry because she realized that you can't say hello like that to someone you have a soft spot for. At some point, Caroline realized that Michael wasn't interested in her at all. She felt hurt that her friend Emma was right in what she said. Emma felt very sorry for Caroline. She tried to distract the girl from the bad thoughts that constantly visited her head, thought up a variety of activities for the evening. And at some point, Emma realized that she had succeeded in achieving what she wanted. Caroline thought of Michael less and less every day. And then she forgot he even existed. Well, at least that's how it seemed to Emma. The next 3 school years flew by quickly and easily because Michael was no longer in school, and Caroline didn't see him. She went about her business and socialized with her peers. The girl was no longer dangling in the clouds. She had no time, as she had to prepare for exams. They heard that Michael, after graduating from school, entered some institute, which was in another city. Because of that, they had never even met him in their small town. Emma looked at Caroline and couldn't believe that such a great love had left no trace. Not only had her friend stopped thinking about Michael, but she had started dating other guys. Each time, Caroline thought that this was her only love that would go with her all her life. However, the young men were dishonest. Each wanted only one thing from Caroline. All as one swore their love while trying to get under her skirt. Caroline was not ready for this and constantly broke up with them, refusing the young men. She talked about taking things slow, but they wouldn't listen to her. Each lover said that if Caroline did not agree to intimacy, then she did not love him. Each of them tried to make her feel guilty. To be honest, they succeeded. Sometimes the girl was on the verge of agreeing. However, at the last moment, she would change her mind. When Caroline stopped being so naive, she realized that she was being manipulated. The most frustrating thing was that, in her opinion, only she had grown up, not her surroundings. This was because each of her suitors made the mistakes of the previous one. It seemed as if they all stopped at the same level of development. It was then that Caroline decided that she would die an old maid. She had come to the conclusion that no man in this town was worthy of her. Emma was both happy about that decision and worried about Caroline. You and I are adults, so we should react differently to fools. Look, Caroline, you've heard it said many times that men are 3 years behind women in their development. That says you should pick an older guy, and you're still messing around with our 1-year-olds. I was walking to school the other day, and I saw Jeff beating nettles with a stick and laughing like a little kid. What can you talk about with people like that? Emma, I get it. Yeah, I've heard that you should pick a guy who's older than you. but I picked one once before. And if you remember, it didn't work out so well. Honey, there's going to be a lot more fools in your life. That's no reason to stigmatize every guy. Okay, Emma, let's put this conversation on hold. I promise you I will not die an old maid. I'm just going to try to get away from all of this right now. And do well, Caroline said with a smile, hugging her friend. That's a different conversation. I thought you were going to get depressed because of the fools. Well, on that positive note, let's go get some delicious ice cream, Emma said in a cheerful voice. Caroline felt as if she would never be able to love anyone as much as Michael in her life. Even though she didn't remember him anymore, she still had that feeling in her chest. She had to take her final exams ahead of her, which at the moment was causing her difficulties. She had been sitting all evenings at her textbooks and solving problems in her hated maths. Caroline was very tired. She could afford to take a walk with her friend on rare free evenings or only on weekends. Such time was especially valuable because she was able to distract herself from all the thoughts that haunted her. As the end of the school year drew nearer, Caroline began to worry. Sometimes it seemed to her that she would fail all her exams and would have to go to a vocational school. Frankly, that was her biggest fear. Her parents always had high hopes for her, so she tried to never let them down. On the days when she had to take her final exams, Caroline remembers only the moments when she entered the classroom as a blur in her mind. After that, it was like she was in a vacuum. God only knows how she solved all the problems and wrote the essays. However, despite such great anxiety and excitement, the girl managed to pass the exams with good and excellent marks. These results were enough to enter the Polytechnic University. By that time, Caroline had not yet had time to decide on a specialty, and therefore went to study only to have a diploma of higher education in her hands. She realized that in the future she would in any case receive additional education when she could decide on the profession she wanted to work in for the rest of her life. In her first year, Caroline was very sad that her only best friend Emma had left for the regional city. She was used to her friend always being around and being able to come over at any moment. However, now they only saw each other a few times a month when Emma came to her hometown for the weekend. Despite this, Caroline had developed quite a good relationship with her classmates. Caroline herself did not expect that she could become one of the most popular girls in the institute. One day she was preparing for her maths class. She quickly read through the notes to refresh her knowledge when she suddenly heard someone calling her from behind. Turning round, she was taken aback. "Swan, is that you?" Smiling broadly, Michael, who was standing a metro away from her, said. Caroline could not believe her eyes. In front of her stood a ghost from the past, which had completely discouraged the girl from believing in true and pure love. She felt both joy and anger at the same time. She was ready even now to throw herself on his neck, to kiss him and tell him how much she loved him all these years. And at the same time, she wanted to hit him for coming to ruin her life again. "Why don't you say something? Standing up like a stranger. Have you forgotten how you told me how much you loved me?" That was a long time ago, and it wasn't true. "Hello, Michael. I heard you were studying in some other city. How did you end up at our institute?" Caroline asked with coldness in her voice. "I missed our town. I decided to transfer in my final year. It's the same specialty. The teaching here is no worse than in the region." "Well, to be honest," Michael said in a calm tone. The bell rang in the building, signaling the start of classes. Caroline started to get ready, but Michael grabbed her arm and asked her a question. "Maybe after school we could have coffee in the square across the street." Caroline was numb to the suggestion. She wanted to hit the young man to make him feel the way she did more than 3 years ago. She couldn't do that because somewhere in the back of her mind all these years she had dreamed of meeting him. Then she decided to take a chance and say yes. Just after the end of the pairs, Caroline was coming down the stairs and saw Michael waiting for her in the lobby. He was talking to some upperclassmen. They were smiling and gesticulating vigorously. For some reason, Caroline felt afraid. She thought that if she approached Michael now, he would decide to laugh at her. However, when the young man looked up at her, he smiled broadly and waved his hand for her to approach him as quickly as possible. "Were those my classmates?" Michael said, smiling. "Shall we go for a walk?" Caroline nodded affirmatively, and the young man headed for the park. He bought them each a cup of coffee. To be honest, Caroline didn't like the drink, but she didn't want to contradict Michael. He talked a lot about studying at the institute in another city, about student parties. Caroline walked beside him and listened as if mesmerized. She didn't care what he was talking about. It was enough that he was near and occasionally touched her palm with his fingers. "You've changed a lot," Michael said with a smile. "No, you used to be quite beautiful too. It's just that, in my mind, you're still the one who used to confess her feelings to me." "Well, I wasn't that young." "I was 14, by the way," Caroline said. "Yes, Michael, those were bright feelings. My first love as a teenager, in fact, it was my last." "I mean, really? Are you telling me you haven't had a boyfriend in all these years? What do you take me for?" "Sure, I tried to date different young men, but at some point I realized I was doing something wrong. It was like they were all left living at the age they were when they were 7 or 8 years old. After a few weeks, I realized that this wasn't my option at all. So we broke up. In the 11th grade, I was completely desperate and just decided to devote all my time to studying and preparing for exams." "Why did all those guys annoy you so much?" "Every one of them was trying to get under my skirt. When I got rejected, they tried to accuse me of not being sincere in my feelings. In their opinion, if I liked them, I should have jumped into bed with them on the very first day, and I didn't like that, so I stopped talking to them and getting to know them." "So you mean to say that such a beautiful, glamorous girl has never had a boyfriend?" Michael asked, smiling broadly. He shook his head a little and corrected himself. "I'm sorry, that was a tactless question." "All right, we're not 15 years old." "Yeah, I've never been with anyone. To be honest, I don't regret it. I think it's better to wait a while and break your virginity with someone you really care about." "Did you already have someone in your life that you cared about?" Michael asked with an awkward smile. "Yes, but as they say, there was one and then there was one. Okay, let's change the subject. I feel a little awkward. I just don't even know why you're interested in this." "I'm interested because when I saw you, my heart sank. I had no idea a pretty girl like you had no one. But even so, I'm ready to make it up to you." "And how would you do that?" Caroline was puzzled and really didn't understand what Michael was talking about. Despite the fact that at the beginning of their conversation she felt free and uninhibited, now she was stiff. Her heart began to beat in a frantic rhythm. Her palms began to sweat. "Don't you have any idea? I was just wondering if I was the person you cared about. There's a reason you confessed your feelings to me. Maybe I was careless at the time. But I don't blame myself for that. You realize it was the age you were at. And in fact, you looked very small to me. So I thought, why don't you and I start dating? See if it could work out. It's just, I haven't really had much of a personal life over the years. Honestly, I don't even know why. Most of the girls were easygoing and pretty stupid. Over the years, I've realized that those are not the qualities I'm attracted to in the opposite sex. And you, as I recall, are a very intelligent and well-read girl." Caroline stood in a stupor and just couldn't believe her ears. After all these years, Michael had noticed her and asked her out. At the same time, he didn't talk about any of his impossibly big feelings. It was a shame that he assumed they could have been a good match. She wished he would be speechless at the sight of her. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Michael asked, smiling broadly. "Look, but we're adults. I promise I won't hit on you. Let's give it a try. What if we really do make it work? Now, I could ask myself the basic question of whether you like me. But I know it's going to stump you, and you won't be able to answer it because you don't think there's a right answer. If you answer in the negative, then you're lying to me. And if you answer in the affirmative, it could mean you're horny for me. Well, right?" Michael was right about everything. In fact, if he had asked that question, Caroline wouldn't have been able to answer it. Two opposing feelings were battling inside her. On the one hand, it was the all-encompassing love that had made her refuse to meet and date men all these years. And on the other hand, it was the resentment of the same girl who in the 8th grade saw her lover in the arms of another. In addition, Caroline noticed that the young man's conceit was quite overstated. It made her want to put him down a little, but she loved him so much that she agreed to his proposal. And it had really worked out. Michael and Caroline started seeing each other every day. They walked in parks, went to cafes, to cinemas. The girl felt really happy and thanked God that he brought them together again. Caroline was a rather mature, pragmatic girl, so she did not put big bets on this relationship. It seemed to her that they wouldn't last more than a few months. She had prepared herself in advance for a negative outcome, but despite all this, she enjoyed the time they spent together. Caroline's assumptions were not confirmed. No one realized what Michael and Caroline could possibly have in common. But despite this, they loved and enjoyed each other against all odds. The girl was very jealous of her lover, since so many girls in the institute looked at him. Michael was a little amused by such a reaction of his girlfriend. He was not going to cheat on her, and she realized it herself. Caroline could not charge Michael with anything, but she was not averse to pulling out the hair of her rivals. The young man very beautifully courted his girlfriend, gave a variety of gifts, arranged surprises. Before that, he lived by the principle that a woman loves ears, so he very often told his beloved compliments. Caroline seemed to melt from his words. To tell the truth, she was ready to give herself to him from the very first day of their relationship. However, the first intimacy happened 6 months later. It was the most unforgettable night for Caroline. Michael turned out to be a very tender and sensual lover. To a large extent, he cared not about his own pleasure, but about the pleasure of his partner. Then Caroline thought that such a night would never happen again. However, she was wrong. Michael loved her just as much, and sometimes even hotter than the first time. More than anything, Caroline wanted to tell someone about it, but she regretted that all this time she had never been able to make any real friends. Emma still continued to be her only support and encouragement. Although she lived in another city, the girl had to live alone with her feelings and emotions, although she wanted to shout to the whole world about her happiness and love. After graduation, Michael went to work in a famous office programmer. At the start, he received a little, but every year his income became more and more. When he already realized that he could provide not only for himself, but also for his family, he proposed to Caroline to move in together. The girl immediately agreed. Although inside her lurked fear, she was afraid to a greater extent. She was not afraid of a common life, and that the joint life will make her miss her studies. Michael was very persuasive and promised that he would help her with all the household chores. He kept his promise. After work, he came home and did not scold his wife if the food was not ready, was always ready to help to wash dishes, take out the rubbish, sweep up. On the one hand, it seems that these are so simple tasks that take up little time, but however, sometimes Caroline had neither time nor energy for them. During the last days of her studies, Caroline spent more and more time in the library. She had a thesis to write, but the atmosphere at home made it hard for her to concentrate. Sometimes she forgot about the time and only came to her senses when the staff told her that the library would be closing soon. Then she would run out of the building and find Michael standing there waiting for her. "When I got home from work and realized you weren't here yet, I came straight here," he said with a smile. "Somehow I guessed you were here. Please forgive me. I got so caught up in my thesis that I lost track of time," Caroline said with a guilty look. "Baby, you have nothing to apologize for. I've been through this phase before, and I know how important it is to write a good thesis," Michael replied. "I give you complete freedom, use as much time as you need. This period won't last forever, we'll manage." Michael spoke softly in his beloved's ear, hugging her tightly. The day of the thesis defense was approaching inexorably fast. Caroline's nerves were failing and she began to take sedatives. However, each day they helped less and less. When the day came to hand in the diploma, she was completely disintegrated. From early morning, Michael tried to cheer her up and promised that in the evening of the same day she would have a big surprise. "You won't pass, sweetheart. You can't fail. You wrote this paper yourself and you'll have no trouble answering all the extra questions. Just believe in yourself. Imagine all the hard work you've done. You can't just give up. What's more, you said yourself that you don't care about the grade you get. So why do you care? You can't get out with a certificate. That can only happen if you keep your mouth shut and don't say a word. Come on, wake up, I've got to go to work. I was going to ask you to leave for today, but I decided that I won't distract you from your diploma. So I just want you to call me when it's over." "Okay, of course, you're my nearest and dearest. I love you. Have a good day, honey," Caroline said with tenderness in her voice and hugged her beloved. When Caroline came to the institute, she was horrified to find out that she would be the first to defend her thesis. After this information, her stomach immediately cramped and nausea set in. How to calm her anxiety, she had no idea. She had already taken 2 pills of sedatives up to this point. She was afraid to increase the dosage, as she might overdose. The girl could swear on everything she had, but she absolutely did not remember the moment when she defended her diploma. Everything was like a blur. The members of the examination committee asked Caroline a few additional questions, which she successfully answered. Now she had to wait for all her classmates to speak and find out her grade. Even though she didn't remember her performance at all, her excitement was gone. She didn't worry about anything anymore. She was only interested in what surprise Michael would give her this evening. About 2 hours later, Caroline learned that she had received an excellent grade for her thesis defense. She was overjoyed. She immediately dialed her lover and shared this wonderful news. "You see, baby, I told you everything would be fine. I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy for you. Do you realize you're about to start a new phase of your life? It's going to be a real adult life. I was worried about you." "Let's make an appointment," Michael said. After that, he told Caroline that he would wait for her right after his work in one of the shopping centers. The girl assumed that this way they would celebrate her graduation from university. Perhaps they would go shopping, or maybe they would go to some restaurant. And Caroline did not know how to dress properly, so she chose something more solemn. Finished with her makeup, she immediately hailed a taxi to go to the meeting place. As she pulled up, Caroline noticed Michael standing at the entrance with a bouquet of flowers. They were her favorite daisies. The girl adored the wildflowers, their fragrance that filled the whole room, and how long they stood in the vase. The young man gave his beloved a bouquet, hugged and kissed her tenderly. "You look just amazing. How did you know that I would invite you to the restaurant?" Michael asked. "Are we going to a restaurant?" Caroline asked with feigned surprise. "Of course I couldn't leave my favorite girl without a party. It's your day, and it's all about you," Michael replied. The young people headed to the shopping center and went to one of the best restaurants in the city. It was located on the top floor. The distinctive feature was the panoramic roof. It was especially beautiful here at dark, with stars peering out and winking from every direction. Caroline especially liked the fact that the restaurant had a lot of live plants, while most of the competitors used only artificial ones. It gave a special cozy atmosphere. After a delicious dinner, Michael asked the waiter to bring dessert. Caroline objected, talking about the fact that not a single gram of food would fit into her anymore. However, the young man was very persistent. The girl gave in and ordered her favorite tiramisu. When the waiter brought their order, Caroline told Michael about something carefree and did not notice anything around her. As soon as she remembered the dessert, she immediately picked up the spoon to break off a piece and put it in her mouth. However, her hand froze a few centimeters away from the plate. In the center of the dessert, in a turret of whipped cream, was a beautiful ring with a large stone. Michael wanted to wait for any reaction from her, however, she was afraid to even move. The young man noticed the coming tears in her eyes and immediately got off his seat and got down on his knee. "My sweet and dear Caroline, we have been together for a long time. I am grateful to fate for bringing us together all these years. My only regret is that back then, when you were 14 years old, I didn't believe your words when you spoke of your feelings for me. I am so sorry that we lost so many years. I'll be honest, I was purposely waiting for that moment when you graduated from the institute. Now I want to ask you one thing. Will you marry me?" "Yes, yes, of course, yes," exclaimed Caroline to the whole restaurant and jumped up to hug her husband. All around, all the customers applauded, began whistling, congratulating the young couple. "You are the man of my life. I fell in love with you as a little girl and I continue to love you. Only my love grows stronger every day. I love you, my good man," replied Caroline. "You see how it turned out. A few years ago you didn't want to start dating me. I remember. Somehow you doubted that our relationship would last. Somehow I was already convinced that we'd be together forever." It was the second happiest day of Caroline's life. We decided not to postpone the wedding, and the next day we went to the registry office and filed an application. The date of marriage registration was set in a month. This suited the young people, as they did not want a lavish celebration. To Caroline's surprise, even after the wedding, their relationship had not changed at all. They were still as close and loved each other. The newlyweds always indulged in love at the first opportunity. When Caroline told her friend Emma about it, she expected her friend to be happy for them. However, Emma always asked some uncomfortable questions and demanded answers. How can you talk so excitedly about sex with your husband when you haven't tried it with anyone else? Tell me, don't you just feel bad that you married your first man? I, for one, could never do that. You should have found another man after he proposed to you. You have to compare the two, you know. Caroline was very hurt by such words. She didn't understand her friend's consumerist attitude towards men. The girl was completely satisfied with their intimate life with her husband. How can you have sex with someone else if you love and want only one, she thought. What pleased her most was the fact that Michael always proved to be unresponsive. He was only too happy to be in bed with his favorite woman. So Michael and Caroline lived for 3 years. And after that, in the life of a young man, there was a tragedy that changed his life completely. One of the days on his phone received a call. When Michael answered it, his face immediately contorted with a grimace of grief. Caroline stared at him without taking her eyes off him. At that moment, she still didn't understand what had happened and couldn't help him properly. The young man continued to hold the phone to his ear, and tears welled up in his eyes at that moment. His jaw was clenched, and it showed that he was trying his best to fight all his emotions. If Caroline hadn't been there, he probably would have slumped to the floor like a 5-year-old, but he wasn't used to showing weakness, especially in front of the woman he loved, and he couldn't fight his emotions. "Michael, what's wrong? Who called you? Are you nervous?" Caroline asked. She had no idea what could cause her husband such emotions. The hospital called. Grandma's dead. The phone fell out of Michael's hands and shattered. When he said out loud what he had heard, he couldn't contain his emotions, and he cried. Caroline didn't know much about Michael's relatives, but she had heard about his grandmother. That woman had replaced both his parents and his friends. While still in school, they often saw each other. However, after entering the institute, meetings became much less frequent. But despite this, Michael called his beloved grandmother every 2 days, asking how she was doing, whether she needed any help. Just a few months ago, he went to her to help with the city, since she at her age was no longer coping. The girl was indignant that such a misfortune had befallen a loved one of her favorite man. Recently, the grandmother did not complain about her health, only saying that it was already much harder for her to carry buckets and dig beds. No one paid much attention to that, because at her age it was already a good thing that she was getting around on her own. Caroline wanted to ask Michael as many questions as she could to understand fully what had happened. However, she couldn't find the right words. She waited patiently for her husband to come to his senses so that he could tell her everything himself. The hospital called. My grandmother had been hit by a lorry, Michael began to say after he had calmed down. They tried to save her, but they couldn't. It turned out that the only shop in their village had closed, and she had gone to a neighboring one to buy groceries. As she was crossing the motorway, she didn't see the moving lorry. "God, I'm in so much pain. I don't understand how all this could have happened," Michael said as he relived the tragedy. She lived to her years. She felt normal. Yes, she got weaker, but that's normal for her age. How could one, such a ridiculous accident, take the life of a beautiful person? "I'm alone now." "What are you talking about? Why are you alone?" Caroline tried to reassure her beloved husband. "At least you have me, and at most you have your beloved. You've got your friends, your parents." "Yeah, I've got you, I guess, and all my friends one day and gone the next. My parents never needed me. They gave me to my grandmother from the day I was born. She was the only person on this planet whom I loved with all my heart and soul, and was grateful for everything she did for me. I don't know how to move on." Pain settled in Caroline's soul. The feeling was brought on by Michael's words. She was hurt because he was talking about how Grandma was the only person he loved and was grateful to. Didn't she deserve the same words for herself? Caroline silently tried to reassure her spouse as she inwardly nurtured all these questions that were popping up in her head. She had done a lot for them too. She too had tried and loved him with all her heart and soul over the years. The girl realized that this jealousy was unfounded. One should never be jealous of one's loved one's relatives, much less the dead. She hoped that Michael would need at most a few weeks to come to his senses and return to his former state. She tried not to bring up topics that would make her spouse feel heartache again. Michael tried to keep his cool, too. He didn't want to show his wife the weakness that overcame him. Every day he tried to put on a smile and make himself look carefree. And perhaps he was even succeeding. However, inside he was burning resentment at this imperfect world. To others, their couple had not changed in any way. They still looked loving and happy, and only the sadness in Michael's eyes gave away his real state. Caroline was also glad that her beloved husband was slowly returning to his old life, and everything seemed to be the same as before. However, the girl noticed that there had been no intimacy between them for a long time. After this realization, Caroline wanted to meet her husband after work as usual in beautiful lace lingerie and a silk dressing gown, but after a little thought, she decided that it would be inappropriate. If at this point Michael had a desire to make love to his wife, he would have had it long ago. However, he was being passive, and then Caroline decided not to touch him for the 40 days that are set aside for mourning. When that period had passed, nothing had changed. Everything remained the same. Michael lived a monotonous life. He came to work, completed his tasks, and went home. At home, there was a delicious and hot dinner waiting for him, after which he and Caroline would fall on the sofa and they would watch TV. And it was always like that. Caroline was getting nervous that she couldn't get what she wanted from her beloved Michael. She had become much more affectionate in her grooming of her spouse, wagging her tail like a sly fox. But except for his kind, sweet smile, she received nothing. Because of the lack of intimacy, the girl began to think that Michael had a mistress. Michael was much harder than it seemed. The fact is that immediately after receiving the news of his grandmother's death, he began to notice various changes in his body. His appetite decreased many times over. There were days when he ate nothing at all, because his stomach did not want to take it. Periodically, those around him noticed that his eye was twitching. From the look of it, many people thought he was nervous. Although he was in a calm state, his hands would also shake periodically, as in Parkinson's disease. But there was another problem that bothered Michael the most. It was that he had stopped wanting his wife. No, he would have phrased the problem differently. He had stopped wanting any kind of intimacy with women. His body did not react in any way to the beautiful curves of Caroline's body, which used to be so desirable that he could not contain himself. What frightened the young man was what he realized Caroline was waiting for him to act. One had to be a fool not to realize that the girl did not undertake any manipulation, just because of the fact that there was grief in the family of her beloved. She waited as long as she needed to. And all the while, Michael hoped that his body would start working again like it used to. However, the days passed inexorably fast, but nothing changed. The young man realized that Caroline's patience was not infinite. Sooner or later, she would have the conversation he wanted to avoid. That's when Michael got the idea to see a doctor. He didn't like going to the doctor, even when he was really sick. Right now, he didn't feel at all like telling a stranger about his problems, even though he might be able to help. It was too intimate for Michael, but he couldn't find any other way out. When Michael entered the doctor's office, he began to absent-mindedly shuffle from foot to foot. The doctor was used to this reaction of men, so he calmly invited him to sit down. "You understand, if you keep quiet, I won't be able to help you," the doctor spoke after several minutes of Michael's silence. He understood how difficult it was for all these men to talk about problems. However, the appointment was on time and the queue could not be delayed. Michael took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and blurted it out. He realized that his lack of desire was entirely due to the stress he had received. That's why he immediately spoke about the situation. As he talked, he sat with his eyes closed the whole time, ashamed to open them and look at the doctor. "Michael, listen to what I can tell you," the doctor began to speak after he had gathered the history. "I don't think you need to worry about your situation, as this reaction of the body to stress is considered quite normal. You know, I used to think so too, but it's been quite some time now. The functions haven't all returned. If this had happened a week ago, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I think the problem is more serious than you're describing." Michael began to object to the doctor's words. No, I assure you, you don't have to worry about anything. Most people tend to think that these reactions should resolve themselves within a week or two. But there are cases where the dysfunction can persist for months, or even years, the doctor said. "I am a married man, and I understand your situation and your worries. The only thing I can advise you at the moment is to take special pills before sexual intercourse. But these same drugs are not a cure. They were created by scientists for old people." "I'm still 30 years old," Michael objected. "No. And you're suggesting that I fulfill my marital duty with these pills? I'm beginning to question your qualifications." Michael was getting nervous because this was not the help he had hoped for. "Believe me, if I wasn't qualified, I wouldn't be here," the doctor said. "If you want to speed up the recovery process, you should also take a course of anti-anxiety medication. If you have not regained function after such a time, it means that inside you are still experiencing the loss of your loved one. This is normal, but sometimes it crosses all boundaries of reason." The doctor wrote Michael a prescription. "Now, these are the pills you'll need to buy at the pharmacy. The last ones on the list will help you feel like a real man in bed with your wife." Michael snatched the prescription from the doctor's hands, did not say goodbye, and quickly left the office. This was not the kind of help he had hoped for. Walking to the nearest public garden, the man took out his phone and went online. He was convinced that he could do himself more good by self-medication than by these pills prescribed by the doctor. On one of the internet pages, Michael saw an advertisement for a special dietary supplement for male strength, relatively inexpensive, and from the reviews it was clear that it is completely safe and cannot harm the body, as it contains only natural components. For Michael, this drug turned out to be a real salvation. He was sure that after it immediately all functions would be restored. Therefore, he immediately placed an order. Now it was only necessary to wait. Managers warned Michael that the dietary supplement would be delivered within a week. The man did not think that the delivery would take so long, so he began to worry. All this time, Caroline had been hanging around him like a fox. He didn't know how to get away from her. Michael came up with various excuses, in the truthfulness of which sometimes he himself did not believe. His nerves were on edge, and at that moment Michael decided to use his doctor's prescription to buy anti-anxiety medication. He did this furtively from his wife, so that she did not think that he had any problems, as the young man constantly pretended that his life was fine. He had completely forgotten about this tragedy, which happened less than 2 months ago. The effect of the pills that were prescribed by the doctor did not take long. Already that evening, Michael felt much calmer. The worries caught up with him at the moment when Caroline flirted with him. Sometimes he wanted to sit in front of his wife and tell her everything. Would she understand? Wouldn't she turn away? He wasn't sure of an affirmative answer to those questions. So he decided to continue his tactic of complete silence. All this time, Caroline was going crazy, as she didn't understand what was happening. Sometimes her worries grew to such an extent that she began to follow her husband, that he was late at work, and that's why the girl had thoughts that he was cheating on her. But however, after several checks, she still came to the conclusion that he is completely loyal and faithful to her. But that did not explain that he had lost interest in his woman. She promised herself to find some explanation that would satisfy her interest and worries. The girl didn't like playing detective, but periodically she still continued to pick up Michael's phone to look at his correspondences. She supposed that the mistress didn't necessarily have to be from his work. Perhaps a woman from another city altogether. Each time the phone ended up in her hands, she found nothing. When Michael entered the room at those moments, Caroline felt very embarrassed. Caroline had often read in women's magazines and forums that when there was a rift in a family, the spouses would sit down across from each other and talk frankly. She had pictured this picture in her head several times. She could have asked Michael to sit down at the negotiating table, but this conversation had to start somewhere. Every time she broached the subject, the man would get nervous and walk away. How do you get him to sit, listen, much less answer questions? At some point, the girl thought about asking her husband to see a marriage counselor. In their relationship, there were no quarrels and scolding. They also continued to love each other. Caroline felt like a real woman, loved, happy, received gifts from her husband. However, the lack of attention and desire killed everything in this background. And maybe it was the psychologist who would help pull out of Michael the emotions he was hiding from her. "Michael, we need to talk to you," Caroline spoke softly as she entered the room where Michael lay watching television. "What's wrong, honey? You look worried, honey. Every time I try to talk to you about something, you always get nervous and walk away. I don't know how to approach you. I feel like you're not in love with me anymore. Or there's someone else. If you can't tell me all this, then maybe we can go to a family counselor," Caroline said timidly. "What family counselor, Caroline? Are you out of your mind? How could you even think that I had someone? That I've fallen out of love with you? I don't kiss you, I don't hug you, I don't give you gifts. I'm affectionate and gentle enough with you. I go home after work all the time," Can you please explain when I can cheat on you if I'm either working or with you? But you sometimes stay late at work, don't you? Yes, I sometimes stay late at work. Is that a sin? You know that I have always tried to earn as much money as possible for our family so that you stay at home doing your favorite things. Is that wrong? I'll be honest with you, if you keep having these conversations with me, then even a marriage counselor won't be able to help us. I understand men now more than anyone when they talk about their wives bothering them. Why do you talk to me like that? Why are you talking to me like that? Have I ever said anything bad about our family? I just want us to be okay. You're pretending like nothing happened, but I know how hard it must be for you. Yeah, from the outside looking in, we're fine. But I'm not looking from the outside. I'm in this family and I know there's a rift. I've tried to talk to you for the 1000th time, but I keep getting silence. I'm glad I can get some emotion out of you now. Even if it's anger, at least I realize that it's all pissing you off too. You care about what's between us. I can tell. But I don't understand why you're not doing anything about it. If it's really as you say and you don't have anyone on the side, I don't want to talk to you like this. You're forcing me to. If you know I'm hurt, why do you keep touching it? Can't you just wait? Any wound, whether it's on your body or your soul, takes time to heal. But if you keep poking it, it takes longer. I'm not stupid. I understand what's bothering you about our relationship. And since you wanted to talk to me, here you go. Can you give me just a little more time? I can't tell you how much. I realize that time is the most precious thing in our lives. But if you're not willing to give it to me, then we should break up. So you're telling me to get a divorce. So all that love you've been saying is a lie. God, how stupid I was to believe you. When I confessed my feelings to you when I was 14, I should have realized what kind of man you are. Jesus, what are you talking about? I'm only asking for a little time, Michael replied. Everything I've told you is true, but right now there's a chasm between us. Do you refuse to hear me? Michael asked, losing his temper. How many times are you going to remind me that I didn't take a little girl's words seriously back then? Caroline looked at him with her blue eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks, blurring her mascara and eyeliner. A lump stood in her throat, preventing her from saying a word. She realized she'd gotten what she wanted. The conversation had happened, and she'd heard the words she'd dreamed of hearing. She was glad, however, that she had brought out his true emotions. His words were so sharp that they pierced her heart. Finding no more strength, Caroline turned around and ran out of the flat. Once outside, she didn't know where to go. Usually when she felt sick, she ran to Michael's house. Ignoring the people around her and her appearance, around the corner she saw the beautiful golden domes of a newly built church and was pulled there by an invisible force. Caroline had never been to church before and didn't know what to do, where to go, or where to put candles. But she headed there anyway. She had seen people baptized 3 times at the entrance to the church and decided to do the same. As she crossed the threshold, a woman stopped her. Honey, you can't do that. You have to cover your head. But I don't have anything. I didn't mean to come. I just felt the urge, Caroline said, barely audible. The woman nodded as if she understood. She knew how an unknown force led people to church to ask for help or to thank God. The woman went behind a small counter, pulled a headscarf from there, and held it out to Caroline. The girl tied it on her head and approached the icon. Lord, please help me to make things right with our family again. I love him more than life and I don't know how to live without him. Help him to heal his wounds. It's too hard for him and he can't do it on his own. I'd like to offer him my help, but I don't know how. He might refuse. Today was the first time we fought in years. I never thought it would be over something so petty. Although, to be honest, it's hardly nothing. There's just so much going on. I don't think we can do it without you. Please help me. I want to be happy and loved again. After standing for a moment, Caroline headed for the exit. She stopped beside the woman to hand over the headscarf, but the woman waved her hand, signaling that Caroline could keep it. She was grateful for the help, so she took out some cash and dropped it into the special donation box at the church. Caroline still didn't know where she should go, so she decided to head wherever her eyes took her. At this time, Michael was going crazy and wasn't himself for allowing the argument to happen. Yes, he and Caroline had been difficult at times, but they had always found a way out. and now she'd run away. He had no idea where to look for her because she'd left her phone at home. Michael thought the best option was to stay home. If he went outside to look for her, they might go in different directions and get lost. At that moment, Michael's phone rang with a courier who had brought him a parcel of supplements. If he had received this parcel at another time, he would have been happy. But now he didn't care about this drug, because he had a more serious problem in front of him fixing his relationship with his wife. Michael left the small box in the hallway and went into the living room. Meanwhile, Caroline continued walking down the street. Her lack of outerwear had left her so cold that her fingers and toes were numb. She had no choice but to return home. Most of all, the girl hoped that Michael had come to his senses and would not be hysterical anymore. For the sake of their peace of mind, she was ready not to start such conversations, but just to wait. When she reached the front door of the flat, Caroline stopped and exhaled. She looked up as if to God. "Please let her calm down," she whispered under her breath. As she entered the hallway, Michael's hurried footsteps were heard. Seeing his wife on the threshold, the man exhaled with relief, rushed to her and hugged her tightly. His worries were so strong that he could not let her out of his embrace. They stood like that for several minutes without saying a word. "Caroline, honey, I'm so sorry, please. I don't know what came over me. I know, but I couldn't control my emotions. I'm going through the same thing you are. I'd really like things to get better. But I went to the doctor, and he said it takes time." "I apologize too, Michael. I realize that sometimes I overreact. I've tried to talk to you so many times. It's hard for me to process all of this inside of me. You said you went to the doctor. Why didn't you tell me anything?" "Well, maybe because I was ashamed. You didn't think about it. I'm a young man, and I can't do it." "Who would brag about that?" "The doctor said we just have to wait." Caroline and Michael sat on the couch discussing a serious problem. "Isn't there any other option?" she asked Michael. In his opinion, the only solution was to wait, and if necessary, to take pills that had an immediate effect. "Have you taken these pills before? Maybe we could try them?" Caroline asked with hope in her voice. No, Caroline. Those pills won't have any effect. You have to be treated for your body to regain function. It's like a ventilator. Your body can't breathe. You're put on a ventilator that does it for you. Taking these pills that the doctor prescribed to me has exactly the same effect on the body. I don't want that. I want to feel like a man again. Love my beautiful woman night after night. Is that too much to ask? Caroline realized that if this conversation didn't end now, they might have a fight. She had made a promise at church that she was willing to give her husband as much time as he needed. "Okay, I heard you. I'll wait as long as it takes. Can I just ask you one more question?" "Thank you, dear. I'm glad we could come to an agreement." "Go ahead." "There was nothing on the dresser when I left. What's this little box? Where did it come from?" When I left the doctor's office, I didn't believe what he said. I started searching the internet to find out the real cause of my condition. But on one of the sites I came across an advert for a male strength supplement. And at that moment, it seemed to me a super attractive offer. So, anyway, I ordered it. It arrived today while you were away. I'm anticipating your next question, so I'm going to answer it right away. No, I'm not going to take it. You see, it's just that it's been so long since the doctor's appointment that I've been able to accept what he said. I'm taking some other pills that I've been prescribed to calm me down. It should speed up the recovery process, Michael said. I heard you. Let me just hide it so it doesn't get in the way. Or maybe we could just throw it away. But why? Maybe we could give it to one of our friends as a joke. Caroline took the little box and carried it into the kitchen. On the way, she scrutinized it carefully, studying the composition and method of application. Even though Michael didn't want to take any more of it, Caroline decided that she knew better than he did what was best for him. If he didn't want to take care of his health, she would take care of it herself. In her opinion, the supplement could not bring any negative consequences, so there was nothing to be afraid of using it. Opening the bottle, Caroline smelled a pungent herbal odor. The girl thought that it would not be possible to simply add these drops to food. She had to think of something tricky. The best way to do this was flavored tea. She could add the dietary supplement to the drink without Michael noticing. Caroline didn't want to wait for the right moment and decided to act right away. She went to the kitchen cupboard, opened it, and began studying all the teas they had. She needed to find one that had the most pungent odor. She found a mango-flavored tea. Caroline knew that Michael loved a drink with that flavor more than anything else in his life, so the girl needed to make a separate tea for herself. She brewed her favorite bergamot tea in one of the beautiful mugs she had recently bought at the mall. For Michael, on the other hand, she made mango tea in a teapot. She had to be careful not to let her spouse walk in at that moment. Quietly looking around, Caroline pulled out a small vial of herbal drops for male power. As she was measuring the right amount of drops into the kettle, the vial fell out of her hands and she poured about a third of the entire volume of the supplement into the kettle. At first she was afraid that she might overdose, but then she remembered that the drug had a natural composition, which meant that it couldn't do anything bad for a person. Caroline didn't pay much attention to what she had done. She tried to catch the aroma from the drink and realized that she could only smell mango. The girl was satisfied with this result and took the drinks to the living room, where Michael was waiting for her. The young man was a little surprised when he caught the aroma of familiar tea. Caroline hadn't asked him before if he wanted tea. "I decided that after today we needed to calm down," Caroline said with a sweet smile. "So I made our favorite teas. I made bergamot for myself as always, and I picked out a mango one for you. Do you want me to get you something for your tea?" "The only thing I want for tea is for you to be with me right now," Michael said warmly, pouring tea into a mug. Caroline watched him as if mesmerized. She decided that her only mistake had been in not tasting the drink. It might not have smelled different, but the taste might have given away her devious plan. To her delight, Michael hadn't noticed anything. Caroline hoped that a larger dose of the drug would speed up its effects. Periodically she looked at Michael but realized that nothing was working. Then the girl moved to active actions, began stroking and kissing her lover. However, it was obvious that he was not happy about this behavior. Completely desperate, Caroline went to the bedroom to get ready for sleep. Half an hour later, Michael came into the bedroom. He lay down in his seat. Everything was as it always was. It took Michael literally minutes to fall asleep while Caroline twisted around and couldn't find a comfortable position. When she did get comfortable, she couldn't fall asleep. Her head was filled with thoughts that kept her awake. From time to time, she looked at her husband. She loved him with all her heart and soul and wanted everything to return to normal as soon as possible. While Caroline sank into the realm of Morpheus, she dreamed wonderful good dreams. It was times like these that she truly rested in the dream realm. Their relationship with Michael was still good as before. The young man loved his spouse, cared for her, protected her. Caroline dreamed that they were with her husband on a yacht. A light sea breeze, the salty taste of the sea appeared in her mouth. Everything was so beautiful. However, even in her dream, Caroline realized that it would soon be over. Through the dream, she heard that Michael began to cough. When she opened her eyes, she saw that her husband was grabbing his throat, coughing and moaning. It seemed to her that he was still asleep, so she decided to wake him up. As soon as she touched his body, the man opened his eyes abruptly. The whites were completely red, with burst vessels. The coughing was getting worse by the minute. Caroline quickly jumped out of bed and ran to the kitchen to fill a glass of water. When she entered the bedroom, she saw that Michael was already beginning to choke. She sat down next to him, put her arms around him, and held out the glass, but he knocked it out of her hands. As much as Caroline wanted to help him, she realized she couldn't. Then she immediately ran around the flat to find her mobile phone and call an ambulance. There was no way she could help Michael because she didn't understand what was happening to him. She could only hope and trust that the medical team would arrive within minutes. Michael's breathing was getting heavier. With each passing minute, his face began to take on a purplish-blue hue. The panic inside Caroline was beginning to rise. However, at that moment, the intercom rang. It was an ambulance. The paramedics quickly entered the flat and went to Michael's flat. The crew stood in the doorway and watched them examine him. Almost immediately, they said it was a swelling of the larynx that was caused by allergies. Caroline was in shock at this diagnosis, because she and Michael had never noticed any signs of allergies in him before. The paramedic gave him a few shots, and then they loaded the young man into the ambulance and took him to the hospital. Caroline went with them. She could not leave her favorite man alone in such a difficult situation. The young man was immediately taken away. At that moment, a doctor came into the corridor who wanted to talk to Caroline. "Hello, I need to ask you some questions," the doctor asked in a calm voice. "Can you please tell me what your husband is allergic to?" "Good evening. I can't answer that question because nothing like this has ever happened to him before." "This is the first time," Caroline said, shifting from foot to foot. "Well, then think about it and tell me, what was the most unusual thing you've consumed today? Or maybe you changed a new laundry detergent." The doctor kept asking questions. "No, it's the same. I can't tell you that we had any unusual meals. Everything he ate today he's eaten before." "All right, what about drinks? Did he drink any alcohol today? You know, sometimes a reaction like that can be triggered by red wine." "No, nothing like that. I would have told you about it." "Doctor, can you please tell me if he's feeling better?" Caroline asked. "I can't answer that question with certainty yet," replied the doctor. "The thing is that you called the ambulance late enough, so your husband is now in a serious condition. They are giving him hot shots in the treatment room. They're supposed to make him feel much better. If the swelling doesn't go down, then we'll try inhalation. But I've heard many times that inhalation is not to be used because it's addictive," Caroline objected. "So you're suggesting I don't use it and wait for your husband to die? Why die right away? You said he should feel better after the injections." Caroline didn't calm down. "If the swelling doesn't go down, then maybe we should give him more shots." She'd heard repeatedly that inhalations were addictive. Caroline didn't want her spouse to live a life of dependency. "You see, there's a certain dosage that allows for these injections. If we increase it, we could overdose. And then against the background of oedema of the larynx, your husband may develop other symptoms," explained the doctor. "And all of this together could hasten his demise. Is that what you're trying to do?" "How can you think that of me? If I wanted him to die, I wouldn't have called an ambulance," Caroline said indignantly. "And why are you acting like this anyway? You're a doctor. You're supposed to calm people down." "I say that because you are trying to oppose the use of inhalation," replied the doctor. "Yes, I am a doctor, but I should not reassure anyone. I should tell the truth. If I tell you that everything will be fine and your spouse ends up dead, you will blame me." "And why would you blame me? Because I spent all this time with my colleagues pulling him out of the woods and I couldn't? Please keep your emotions to yourself and go home. If you want to stay here, shut your mouth and keep quiet." It was not uncommon for a doctor to encounter such patients and their relatives. However, he could not develop immunity to such communication during all the years of his work. After this conversation, the man turned around and went to the treatment room where Michael was. Caroline stayed that way in the corridor. She felt that the doctor was wrong in having the right to talk to her like that. His words had crashed into her ears, and now she was constantly thinking about the fact that the risk of Michael dying was pretty high. The hot shots, as the doctor had suggested, had not helped Michael. In addition, inhalation did not have the desired effect. The doctors decided to transfer the young man to the intensive care unit under IVs. Caroline was horrified by such news. When her husband Michael was taken to the intensive care unit on a gurney, she ran after him. However, no matter how hard she tried, she was not allowed inside. All her attempts were in vain, and she was left in the corridor. It was one of the hardest times for Caroline. She couldn't understand what was causing such an allergic reaction. Their meals were no different than before. She didn't use any new cleaning or laundry products, so all possible causes ran out in her mind. She had once read on the internet that as a person gets older, they can develop allergies to pets. However, there were no pets at their home. The girl did not go home, but kept waiting in the hospital for good news. She was sure that her husband would survive and be with her. She refused in every way to believe in the high risk of a fatal outcome. At first, the doctors and nurses tried to persuade her to go home. However, when they realized it was useless, they passed her by as if she was not there. This attitude made it even harder for Caroline. Throughout her life, doctors had always been angels in white coats to her. However, now she faced a completely different attitude to patients and their relatives. The girl wanted to go to complain to the head doctor, but halfway down the road she stopped and thought that perhaps the medical staff was not obliged to reassure her and give her false hopes. On the second day, Caroline still had not received any news about the improvement of her husband's condition. She continued to push for news and spend the night in the corridor. At some point, the thought crept into her head that perhaps she was to blame for her lover's condition. She remembered the drug she had mistakenly put in his tea. Perhaps that was what had caused such an allergic reaction. Given that the dosage had been exceeded several times over, the likelihood of an allergic reaction was increasing. The feeling of guilt did not leave Caroline throughout Michael's treatment. After a few days, the young man felt better. After a while, he was moved to a regular room. Caroline was overjoyed at this news and couldn't believe that he had managed to recover. Immediately after that, she headed to her lover's room. When she entered the ward, she found that he was not lying there alone. Besides him, there were 5 other men there. It was clear from Michael's face that he did not feel very well, but his eyes showed his true joy for finally seeing his beloved woman. He didn't really fully understand what was happening to him as he had spent most of the time unconscious. "Caroline, sweetheart, hello. It's really good to see you. Can you tell me what happened to me? I haven't seen a doctor yet today, but the nurses won't tell me anything. I realize I've been unconscious most of the time. You can't imagine the dreams I've had during that time. They were very strange dreams. Walking down some kind of pipe and going through some kind of tunnel. And the interesting thing is, I kept thinking I'd see you when I finished. But it was like I couldn't find you anywhere. Seriously, no matter how hard I looked for you, you were nowhere to be found. I realized even then that this wasn't just a dream, and in theory you should appear. But it's like you just fell into the ground. Oh, it's so good to see you. You have no idea how much I've been worried about you. I've been in the hospital all these days, never went home. I slept in the corridor. The doctors say you had an acute allergic reaction with swelling of the larynx. They asked me a lot of questions about what had changed in our normal life. I told them everything was the same. I don't understand what could have done that, Caroline said in a quiet, loving voice. She was ashamed to admit that it was her fault that her husband had almost died. She decided not to tell him about it. It's strange, I've never had allergies in my entire life. You know, I read on the internet once that you can get allergies as you get older, but it was more about allergies to cats and dogs. We don't have those. Or maybe you were at someone's house that day who has pets. The girl kept lying. Yeah, I wasn't at anyone's house. It's weird. You'll have to take special tests right after your discharge to get your allergies out. It'll help keep me out of these situations in the future. Michael was on the mend. Caroline still continued to spend the night at the hospital. She was already comfortable leaving him alone, but she couldn't afford to come to their house alone. Everything around her would remind her of the day she had made the fatal mistake. The young man was discharged after about a fortnight. During this time, he had lost a lot of weight because he had special nutrition. This was necessary so as not to cause another seizure. After the youngster returned home, Michael immediately took sick leave from work. He needed some time to recover. Caroline was all over him, trying to please him in every way. Her guilt never left her, but grew every day. She feared more than anything that her beloved husband would find out that it was all her fault. To prevent him from having such thoughts, the girl constantly pampered him with various goodies. Every day they spent all the time together. The first few days they did not leave the house at all, lying on the sofa, watching TV, playing board games. Things went back to normal. Caroline was glad that things were back to normal between them. One day, Michael decided to surprise his beloved and cook breakfast in bed. Returning an hour earlier than his wife, he went to the kitchen. He then wanted to treat Caroline with delicious pancakes and fresh coffee with jam. Michael started exploring the kitchen looking for all the necessary ingredients. He really didn't know very well where everything was, because Caroline didn't let him anywhere near her territory. She thought that a man had no business being in the kitchen if his wife didn't work and was a housewife. When the necessary ingredients for the pancakes were found, the man started cooking. Several times he cursed loudly because the pancakes did not want to separate from the pan at all. He never understood how the cooks were so good at flipping pancakes without even touching them. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do it. In addition, Michael could not adjust the fire on the cooker. Pancakes burned or did not reach. Despite the failures, Michael still managed to make an impressive stack of pancakes. He thought it was an impossible task, which he managed. Yes, the pancakes were thicker than his wife's, but it was the first time he had ever cooked them. The products were lying on a beautiful plate near the window. and the sunlight was falling on them. At that moment, Michael felt like decorating breakfast. The young man opened one of the cupboards, which he thought should contain all the syrups and additives for desserts. There were indeed a great many bottles there. However, most of the names were either in a foreign language or erased. He felt a little uneasy when he saw a small vial of male strength supplements among all those bottles. He was somehow sure earlier that Caroline had thrown it away because he had asked for it. But despite that, the vial was still standing. And then Michael picked it up and found that a third of the volume inside was gone. He was surprised by this, as he couldn't understand where Caroline could have used the supplement. The initial thought that popped into his head was that his spouse had a lover. That thought left as quickly as it came to Michael. The young man thought that if it were true, Caroline wouldn't complain about the lack of intimacy. Michael stashed the vial in his pocket so he could ask his wife questions after breakfast and then started brewing coffee. When everything was ready, he loaded the pancakes and 2 cups of coffee onto a special tray and carried them into the bedroom. When he opened the door, he found Caroline still asleep. He thought about the fact that the girl must have been very tired during all those weeks living in the hospital. She, unlike the patients, was not provided with a separate bed and had to sleep either sitting up or curled up on the narrow benches. It was obvious from her face that she was enjoying her sleep. Michael noted how beautiful she was, so much so that he didn't want to wake her. Despite this, however, the young man walked over to the bed, placed the tray on the bedside table, and leaned over to his beloved. Hugging her tightly, he began to whisper affectionate words in her ear. It wasn't clear whether Caroline was awake or not. However, the corners of her lips lifted up slightly, creating a beautiful smile. When Caroline woke up, opening her eyes, she saw her husband, her lips stretched in a wide smile. She moved slightly so Michael could lie down next to her. The young man could not resist such an offer, so he immediately gave in to the entreaties. The girl enclosed her lover in an embrace and reached for him with her plump lips. The man did not leave Caroline without a morning portion of caresses and began to reciprocate. At some point, Michael realized that Caroline wanted more from him. However, he wasn't ready for that yet. It was at that moment that he decided to stop her and tell her what he had made for breakfast. "I made the pancakes myself," Michael said. "I can't believe it. In all these years, you've never made me anything. How did you do that?" Caroline asked excitedly. "Well, of course I've never cooked before. You never let me go anywhere. Remember, I've tried to make us dinner or lunch many times, and you've always said I'll do it myself, and I've loved cooking since I was a kid. But for some reason, you clung to that kitchen and you weren't ready to give it to someone else. To be honest, sometimes it was so frustrating that it seemed to me that I was not your favorite person at all, but some stranger." "Why do you say that? On the contrary, I always wanted to take care of you. You'd come home from work tired, you had a lot of big orders, after which I realized that you didn't want to do anything. And you'd rush into the kitchen to make dinner. How could I let that happen? I'm a housewife, so I have to do everything myself. It's precisely because cooking calms me down. I'm chopping something up, slow cooking on the cooker. With each clatter of the knife against the board, it's as if the anger is released and the fatigue goes away. I didn't understand what you wanted, what was best. I tried to tell you that it wasn't hard for me, but you wouldn't hear me. For some reason, you got it into your head that I was tired, and therefore I should lie on the sofa." For a few more minutes, the young people argued among themselves about who should cook. Despite the fact that Caroline was completely against Michael going near her kitchen, she did tell him that she would give him her space a few times a month to make them happy with a delicious meal. After that, the young ones proceeded to breakfast. When Caroline put the pancake her husband had prepared into her mouth, she melted with pleasure. It was so soft and buttery that she didn't need to chew it at all. It melted in her mouth. When she decided to drink it with coffee, she mixed up the mugs. She never drank hot drinks with sugar, because she thought that sweeteners spoilt the flavor of the drink. So when she took a sip from Michael's mug, she immediately blinked as if she had eaten a slice of lemon. At that moment, Michael laughed. It seemed to Caroline that this was one of the best days of her life. In her opinion, she and Michael had never been able to spend so much time together. They were devoted to each other. When breakfast was over, Michael decided to ask his beloved a few questions. "Sweetheart," he said, "I realize this isn't a good time, but you know I can't wait until tonight or tomorrow." "What's wrong?" Caroline sounded worried. She immediately began to go over in her head the points at which Michael could be having a serious conversation. However, nothing had happened recently. You see, I was making breakfast today, and I didn't know where all the groceries were, Michael explained. So I must have searched all the cupboards. And when I opened the cupboard where the syrup should be, I saw this. He handed Caroline a small vial of the male enhancement product. I noticed that there's about a third of it missing, Michael continued. You may not want to talk about it, but I can't live with the idea that you're somehow taking this stuff. First of all, I'm curious. And secondly, I'm worried. I don't know, Caroline replied. Maybe the lid was loose, and it was spilling out. I didn't touch it. When you told me to put it away, I put it in the cabinet. Caroline couldn't stop twiddling her fingers and biting her lower lip. She realized her spouse could see her anxiety and panic, but despite that, she continued to lie to him so he wouldn't know the truth. But I can see that you're not telling me something, Michael said. Tell me honestly, do you have a lover? That's the only explanation I can think of. I would never have thought you could have someone on the side. But with the way things have been going lately, I can understand that. So I'm asking you to be honest with me. What lover? Caroline exclaimed. Are you out of your mind? That's why I've been hitting on you every night. Do you have an ounce of conscience? No one could ever love you as much as I do. There's never been another man in my life but you. When you and I got married, all my friends told me I was doing it for nothing. They said I didn't try other men, and then I'd go out with other men. But I don't want other men. I just want you, you know. Okay. I'm sorry, Michael said. I didn't think it would hurt you that much, Michael said. I just asked the question with the first thought that came into my head. Then I thought it couldn't be, but I decided to make sure I was right anyway. Then tell me, where did the drug go? You couldn't have taken it yourself. I couldn't. That's why you drank it, Caroline said with a serious face. Why are you looking at me like that? What am I, your enemy? I'll tell you how it happened. But if you start getting angry like you always do, I'll just turn around and walk away. Do you understand? At that moment, Michael nodded his head slightly. It's because we don't have a sex life, Caroline continued. I completely understand that you're stressed, but I don't like the fact that you're not doing anything about it. You've had a doctor prescribe pills and you refused them because it was beneath your dignity. And you only thought of yourself then. Who's going to think about me? When I came home and saw that bottle, I didn't realize what it was. But when you told me it was special for male strength, I was glad in my heart. I thought, well, at least you're going to do something about it now, right? I was wrong. And this time you told me to just throw the bottle away because you changed your mind. You didn't try it and you changed your mind. And I decided that this time I would think for you. Michael listened to his wife with his mouth open. He couldn't believe that she could do such a thing. After all, this is not just some joke. Although the drug is safe, it still has contraindications. How can you put someone on medication without consulting a doctor? And I thought I decided that you should take the drug, Caroline said. I was making your favorite mango tea and I wanted to measure out a few drops of the drug. But it fell out, and a large amount spilled out. I was hesitating whether to carry it or not. Then I looked at the packaging, read that it was all natural, and decided that it wouldn't do any harm. And yes, Michael, it's my fault you spent a lot of time in intensive care. I'm the reason you got allergies. Tears began to pool in Caroline's eyes and she began to sob. I wanted what was best for you. You know, I'm tired. Okay, we don't have intimacy, but you don't even hug me or kiss me. It's so rare. It always makes me want to cry. I didn't think it would be like this. You never told me you had any allergies. And these are pretty popular, common ingredients. You can't be allergic to ginger. You love ginger biscuits. You think all the days I spent in the hospital with you. I didn't think about it. Caroline said. My guilt always haunted me. I cried. I prayed to God that you'd come out of it. I didn't want to tell you right away that it was my fault. I thought I'd tell you later when you'd recovered. But today you wanted to make these pancakes for some reason. Caroline started to get hysterical. Michael could not look at her in such a state, so he immediately rushed to his beloved and put her in a tight embrace. He understood where the drug had gone and realized that she hadn't done it out of spite. She wanted love and harmony to be restored to their family. It was partly his fault, too. He kept hugging her, kissing her, whispering affectionate words in her ear. When the girl calmed down a little, he told her that he held no grudge against her. He promised that he would go to another doctor who would help him prescribe a new treatment. Michael kept all his promises, and within 3 months their lives were back on track. Caroline felt elated again. Every day she thanked God that she and Michael had made it through this difficult time in their lives. How could you think of an old woman having a baby? Ashley, a blonde girl of 13, stood on the porch of the school and watched as her friend Emily, who was in the same class as her, talked to her older brother. Ashley dreamed now of being in her classmate's shoes and having a conversation with the guy. The girl had fallen in love with her friend's brother Jason last year, and she didn't even realize how it happened. Ashley just woke up one day with thoughts of this teenager, and after that she thought about the guy all the time. As soon as the girl realized that she had fallen in love, she started giving signs of attention to the high schooler. She planted unsigned love notes, but soon she, as a secret admirer, was exposed, and ridicule from Jason's buddy followed. Ashley felt strongly about it at the time. However, her mother Mary, who knew about her daughter's crush, told her to keep her mind off the guy. You're still young, and it's far away. You're not in love, just a crush. As time passes, you'll laugh at your own crush. But a year had passed, and Ashley was still in love with Jason. And now she was standing there watching Emily's friend talking to her brother. Ashley, watching the conversation between the two, dreamed about how her lover would come to her and confess his feelings to her. The girl noticed her friend and her brother heading towards her. Ashley felt a slight shiver go down her spine. She tried to pull herself together. In the meantime, the pair approached her, and Jason said with a good-natured smile, "Hey you need to grow up a little." And then, looking back at the older kids, maybe you're expecting those words from me. But my sister has already told me that you are withering from unrequited love. Ashley, hearing those words, shuddered involuntarily, as if from a blow. The girl looked at her friend reproachfully, and then she turned and ran away. At the moment, she didn't care that she was acting like a cranky little girl. Ashley was annoyed by her lover's words. She was also hurt that her friend was secretly talking to her brother about her. Ashley ran and heard Emily asking her to stop and talk. However, the girl was not responding to her mate's cries. Ashley wanted to run home now, lock herself in her room, and let the tears flow, which soon happened. When the girl calmed down, she made a vow to herself that she would not talk to her friend again, and she also promised herself that she would tear her love for Jason out of her heart and would not look in his direction again. And when Mary's mother came home from work, Ashley pronounced to her, "I don't hang out with Emily anymore. So if she comes over, just tell her I'm not here." "What'd you get?" "It's no big deal. You'll make up in a couple days. By the way, what was the fight about? What was it about?" "It's a long conversation. Emily's a traitor." "That's a pretty big thing to say. You can't make such serious accusations against a man, especially since Emily is your friend. Why don't you tell me what happened?" Mary said affectionately and sat down next to her daughter. Ashley looked at her mother carefully, then excitedly told her what had happened. The woman listened to her daughter, and then she patted her head and said softly, "Your friend cares about you. She wanted to do you a good favor. Emily thought that talking to her brother about you might help draw the boy's attention to you. But what her friend didn't realize was that you can't command the heart. If Jason doesn't care about you, there's nothing you can do about it." Mary paused for a moment. Then, with a sad sigh, she said, "You surprised me, daughter. I thought you weren't thinking about Jason anymore. You're getting a little secretive. Or is it my own fault that I don't notice anything but work?" "Mom, don't say that," Ashley said. "I'm not hiding anything from you, I just don't want to worry you. You really work so hard that I don't want you to worry about me. Taking care of you is the best part for me. You're the only one I've got. And you have to work hard for one simple reason: you need money. Your grandparents on my side of the family are long gone. Your father divorced me 2 years ago and forgot about the obligation to pay child support. And your grandparents on your daddy's side don't need you. Why not? You see, daughter, in some families it happens that parents have 2 children, and one child becomes the favorite. That's what happened in your daddy's family. He didn't become a favorite from mom and dad, and as a result, they don't need you as a granddaughter. If before the divorce with your father they still congratulated you on your birthday, now it does not happen. And you know it yourself. Mom, you always told me that you and Dad got divorced because that's how life works. How does it happen? Her daughter asked her mother in a low voice. Ashley had longed to know the answer, but there had never been the right occasion for such a conversation. Mary sighed softly, put her arm around her and said, "You're getting older and older every day, and I don't even notice it. Well, I'll answer your question. Your father fell in love with another woman who gave him a child, the son he dreamed of. So he made a choice, but not in our direction. Just don't blame him or judge him. Life is complicated. You'll realize that later." After talking to her mom, Ashley felt a lot better. She even took her mind off the fact that she was upset with her friend. The girl kept thinking about the relationship between her parents, and also pondered how she would act in her mother's situation. And in the evening, when Emily called to apologize, Ashley interrupted her and said that she was no longer offended, but she added, "Now it's nothing personal. I won't trust you, or you'll tell the whole world." Time moved on, and now Ashley was 16. The New Year's Eve ball was coming up. The girl carefully thought over her closet for these holidays. She hoped that her friend's brother would come to the ball. Ashley told Emily that she had invited Jason to the event, and Ashley, against all odds, secretly continued to love Jason all this time. And now the girl is already in the auditorium where the New Year's Eve ball has begun. She looks around, hoping to see her lover. Ashley nervously corrects the gatherings on her cornflower-colored dress. The girl had seen this outfit in the store a long time ago, and her mother went to meet her needs and bought it without paying for utilities. Ashley knew about all this, and when the purchase was made, she was nervous because she knew how sensitive they were to late payments. But she wasn't thinking about that now. She wanted to see Jason and to win him over with her appearance. For some reason, she was sure that would happen. Ashley was not fooled in her expectations. Slow music started playing and the DJ announced a white dance. A classmate approached the girl to ask her to dance. Ashley smilingly wanted to point out that the ladies were now choosing the suitors while agreeing, as she suddenly noticed Jason, who had just walked into the auditorium with a buddy. Ashley smiled at her classmate and bluntly refused the offer to dance. The girl fixed her blonde curls, headed toward Jason, walked up to the young man, smiled radiantly, and spoke amiably. "Perhaps tonight your highness will indulge us in a dance at the New Year's Eve ball." Jason looked at the girl, although he saw her at school every day, but on weekdays she seemed to him to be an ordinary schoolgirl who was not different from her peers. Basically, the guy just didn't pay attention to Ashley. But at that moment, she stood in front of him, as if she were a chic woman who had stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Jason looked at Ashley and couldn't understand how in one day she could transform herself so much. He couldn't help but voice his thoughts aloud. "You're like a fairy tale, from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. I can't believe I'm standing in front of Ashley, the same Ashley who's been bugging me for years with her crushes. Are you going to grumble or dance with me when the music stops?" he said with a smile. Ashley didn't say anything else, but simply stepped toward Jason. Soon the couple was dancing. Ashley couldn't believe that she was being embraced by the man she'd dreamed of for so many years, that he would notice her in some way. And Jason continued to marvel at how much his sister's friend had changed. The dance ended. Ashley hurried over to Emily. Jason tried to hold her back, but she just smiled back and headed toward her friend. Emily winked at her friend, but she waved back and sat down on a bench. The music in the room was energetic. Ashley watched the dancers and occasionally glanced at Jason, who was also watching her. At one point she looked at the guy again, but he was gone. She looked around confused as she suddenly heard the DJ's announcement. "This beautiful tune one man dedicates to a beautiful girl named Ashley and asks her to dance." Before Ashley realized what was being said, Jason appeared in front of her and held out his hand. Jason offered to dance again, and soon the couple was dancing to a beautiful melody. They danced together more than once that night, and when the New Year's Eve ball was over, Jason volunteered to walk them home. The couple walked down the snowy road, holding hands. At first they were silent, unable to find the right words. But when they reached the girl's house, Jason suddenly turned Ashley toward him and said quietly, "Will you be my girlfriend?" Ashley laughed, then showed her boyfriend her tongue and hurried toward the house. Jason frowned. "I don't see what's so funny. I'm serious." After he said that, the girl stopped and then walked leisurely back toward Jason. Once next to him, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "Do you know how much I want to tell you right now? How long have I waited for you to notice me? I've endured your friends' taunts, your condescending attitude toward me, as if I were a juvenile who couldn't be taken seriously. And now you're just offering to be your girlfriend. How do I know tomorrow it won't be another joke to amuse my friends?" "Ashley, what are you talking about?" "Yeah, there was a time when I made fun of you, but this is serious. I really want you to be my girlfriend, and I promise that no one will hurt you now." Ashley smiled, waved, and headed home. Jason didn't stop her. Once inside, the girl was greeted by Mary's mother, who saw who was seeing her daughter off. Mary asked how the ball had gone, but all she heard in response was, "Fine." The woman came over and hugged her daughter gently, but Ashley suddenly snuggled into her shoulder and cried. Mary held her tighter against her, and when she calmed down a little, she said softly, "Jason's been paying attention to you. And you don't believe him? Or is there another reason you're crying?" For you, Jason was like conquering a summit. Ashley was going for it. And this is the finale. What's he got going for him? Mammoth, what are you saying? I really love Jason. What finale? Ashley shouted indignantly and broke free from her mother's embrace. It was at that moment that the mother realized that her daughter had actually fallen in love with the guy. The woman only softly mouthed in response, "That's how you know what the feeling is. Look, just don't lose your head." The next day, Jason met Ashley after school and then walked her home. And from that day on, the two began to see each other differently. They tried to meet at every spare moment to be together. A month later, Jason confessed his love for the girl. Time passed, and Jason graduated from high school, after which he was soon drafted into the army. Ashley knew perfectly well that the lover initially wants to serve, wait until he turns 18, and after that to sign. The girl was not against the decision of the chosen one. Especially the decision of the guy pleased Jason's parents and Ashley's mother, who wanted the young people not to hurry with a trip to the registry office. Jason served and returned home. He enrolled in college and Ashley was in the 11th grade. Young people continued to meet and dreamed that soon they would become a married couple, which soon happened. As soon as the girl graduated from high school and she turned 18, the couple legalized the relationship. Ashley enrolled in college at the commodity manager. The newlyweds moved in with Mary. The woman insisted on it. Life itself slowly flowed further. Initially graduated from the school Jason, who got a job immediately on specialty. Afterward, Ashley received a specialty. She, too, got a job. Now the young woman dreamed that they had a child. But several years passed, and she could not get pregnant. Ashley became anxious about it. She was examined, as well as her husband, and soon Ashley received the verdict that she and her husband had different Rh factors, and it would be difficult to conceive a child. The doctor also added, "In your case, getting pregnant under this circumstance will not be easy. I can add that the probability of conceiving a baby is equated to 20% out of 100. However, you can do IVF. That is my advice to you." Ashley was dumbfounded by the doctor's news, but she didn't lose hope and offered her husband to do the required procedure. The young woman piously believed that her spouse would agree to it. But Jason took the proposal of his wife in the bayonet. The man responded by saying everything should be like a normal married couple, without the intervention of any newfangled procedures. Ashley had a hard time with her spouse's answer, but she didn't want to contradict it. She still hoped that the doctors might have made a mistake. The young woman had even enrolled in medical school by correspondence. Ashley now wanted to become a midwife to figure out for herself why she could not get pregnant from her loved one. However, due to the fact that the lady could not conceive a child, scandals began to occur in the family. Jason, if initially veiledly accused his wife that she could not have children, then soon began to openly accuse the chosen one that she was empty. All the excuses of Ashley, who said that she could not get pregnant not only because of her fault, were reduced to zero. Jason blamed only his wife. Soon the man began to stay late at work. Ashley was worried, nervous. She did not want to lose her favorite person. However, family life imperceptibly shipwrecked, and one day Jason came home and began to pack his things. Ashley watched her husband in silence at first, and then she mumbled, "What are you doing? Can't you see? I'm leaving you. I have a woman. I'm sorry, she's expecting a baby. You have to realize we're not right for each other. It happens. I'm sorry. But we've only been together 4 years. Other couples have been together for decades and they don't have kids. And then a baby is born. Maybe you're right. But there's one thing. There's another woman expecting a baby from me, and she doesn't have to wait 10 years to get pregnant. Ashley and Jason should get a divorce, as each of them would be better off with a separate life. I'm sorry, but I have to explain to you the simple truth when you yourself understand everything perfectly well," the woman replied quietly, realizing that it was pointless to hold her husband back. He had made up his mind. Ashley looked sadly at her spouse after these words and left the house. She didn't want to see the man she loved packing his things to leave for good, which soon happened. A month passed after Jason left his wife. During that time, he came to Ashley's house only once to pick up the rest of his belongings and to tell her that he had filed for divorce. Ashley took it calmly, realizing that nothing could be changed. She only wished her ex-husband a happy farewell. Time passed. 3 years passed after the divorce. During this time, Ashley graduated from medical school, got a job in a hospital. Personal life of a young woman did not add up, although representatives of the stronger sex tried to look after her. However, Ashley was indifferent to the attention of men. Her mother was worried about this and repeatedly said, "Daughter, you can't do this. You do not think about your personal life. So many years have passed after the divorce, and you do not even want to accept the courtship of a decent man. I'm talking about Max, who lives across the street. He's been trying to get your attention for months. And you're not paying attention, Mom, you're not paying attention. Can we not start your favorite topic about my personal life?" Ashley said irritably and looked at her mother reproachfully. Mary shook her head sadly in response. A little over a month after her conversation with her mother, Ashley was coming home after work. She wondered if she really should accept her neighbor's advances. The woman went over the merits of her beau in her mind. Ashley was so engrossed in her thoughts that she didn't immediately hear the question. She looked at the brunette and said softly, "Yes, did you say something? I asked you where Takaya Street 63 was. You're going the wrong way. You need to turn left, and then a few houses later, another left." After that, Ashley was interrupted by a laughing stranger. "I've never been sent this far in my life. Why don't you have some time and draw me a route on a piece of paper?" "I'd rather walk you than draw it," Ashley said with a smile. "Can I really expect such a beautiful woman to be my guide? This is my lucky day, and I have good luck in all things," exclaimed the stranger cheerfully. Ashley didn't answer, turned the other way and walked away. The man followed her, telling her why he was in this town. From the story of the new acquaintance, who introduced himself as Alex, Ashley learned that he came here for construction, rented a place on an ad, and earned a little money. Ashley also learned that Alex was married when he was 30 years old, but the family life did not work out, and he and his wife separated by mutual consent. Hearing about the divorce, Ashley involuntarily remembered the breakup with her ex-husband. She thought that she had no relationship left with Jason after the divorce. The ex-spouse had simply packed up and disappeared from her life. The woman only heard news about him from his sister. Thinking about it, Ashley smiled sadly, which didn't escape her new acquaintance. "Why are you sad?" "I guess I'm not a good conversationalist," he said. "It's all right, we're almost there. Now you need to turn into the alley, and there you will find the right house. We are happy to help you. Let's say goodbye." "Wait, I'm not ready to let you go right away," Jason said. "Why don't you let me meet you? Or is there another way? I'll have fun now, and then you can take me to a better cafe where we can continue talking. I have to work today and I'm a little tired." "Yes, and you from the road need a break." "Whatever you say," Ashley said. "Let me give you my phone number and we'll call tomorrow and you can tell me where to go." One more thing. Why don't we go back to being on a first-name basis? Okay, she replied politely, then dictated her phone number and waved her hand to her new acquaintance. She turned around and hurried home. When Ashley got home, her mother came to her and anxiously asked why she was late after work. The woman hugged her mother affectionately and told her about the encounter. "Honey, what's wrong with you?" Mary exclaimed fearfully. "Were you sensible when you went with a stranger alone to see him off? What if this man was a criminal, and it was a planned operation to rob you, or even worse?" "Mom, don't panic," Ashley stopped her. "We live in the 21st century. First of all, I'm not beautiful enough to make a man want me at first sight. Second, I don't look like I have a lot of money. You can see it in my clothes, I don't wear brand name clothes. And third, Jason doesn't look like a gangster. I hope you're convinced by my arguments." Still, it was reckless. Mary sighed. "Promise me you won't do it again." "I will, Mommy," she said with a smile and hugged her mother. A few days later, Ashley met with Jason. The couple chose a small, cozy cafe to talk. The young people made an order, and then Jason asked her how things were going on the personal front. She laughed contagiously when she heard the question, and Jason was puzzled by it. "Your question about my personal life was inappropriate for the situation," Ashley explained. "If I had a boyfriend or was married, would I be sitting with you right now? Of course not. Let's just say that I was married at one time. But it didn't work out for the same reasons you are. We drifted apart. So I'm waiting for my prince to appear on the horizon. Could that be you?" "I don't know. It's too early to tell," Jason said. "It's only the second time we've seen each other. And we don't know each other. I want to tell you right away that I'm not going to get you into bed right now. Sex isn't the most important thing to me when I'm with a woman, although I don't deny that it's important too." "That's honesty," Ashley said thoughtfully and turned the conversation to another direction. After that date, the couple began to call and see each other frequently. 2 months after meeting Jason, Ashley introduced him to her mother. Mary was charmed by her daughter's gallant suitor and informed Ashley about it. "I like Jason myself. I think I'm in love." "That's wonderful." Her daughter smiled. "Has he proposed yet?" "No, he just said that I was his one and only. But you know that men are ready for beautiful words just to get into bed. I'm more interested in actions, not sweet talk." "Then I'll talk to him about it," Mary decided. "But don't do that. I'm going to be 30 in a couple years. Do you want to organize my personal life for me?" Mary smiled at her daughter's words. She didn't say anything in response. However, the older woman took it upon herself to talk to Jason about it. When Jason came to visit again, the landlady offered to have a private conversation with her under a plausible pretext. Jason was surprised by Mary's request. Soon the older woman and the man were sitting in the kitchen while Ashley ran to the store at that moment. Mary had specifically asked her daughter to go get the hammer so she could be alone with Jason. And as soon as Ashley closed the door behind her, the lady of the house asked, "Man, are you going to live your life as a guest? I mean, do you intend to marry your daughter? Are you just going to take me on like that?" Jason replied, bewildered, not expecting a conversation on the subject. In the meantime, Mary asked tricky questions that were directed in one direction only when Jason would propose. Jason's answers were slurred. Then he rose abruptly from his chair and said firmly, "I love your daughter, but can she and I decide when we should marry? I respect you, but I just didn't want to be told what to do and when to do it." "Jason, I'm not interfering with your relationship. It's just that you're not seeing the basics. You don't see Ashley changing from the unknown. I get the impression that your daughter is beginning to doubt your feelings for her." "Are you serious?" Jason asked, puzzled. "I couldn't be more serious. You talk to her about marriage, and then you'll understand," she said with a sad smile. A few days passed after that conversation. Mary was glowing in the kitchen. She knew that today her daughter should come with her boyfriend after work. The older woman cooked pilaf that day and pondered how much longer it would take Jason to propose. The landlady had set a table in the hall. She didn't like to huddle in the kitchen when guests came over. At the moment, Jason was still a guest to her, since he was not a groom. Mary put the plates on the table as she heard the front door open. The woman hurried into the hallway where she saw her daughter entering with Jason. The man politely greeted the lady of the house and then handed a bouquet of scarlet roses with the words, "I have proposed to Ashley and she has agreed to be my other half. Now it's up to you. We want to hear you say your blessing." "Who else among us is taking the bait?" said the old woman with a grin in response. She winked conspiratorially at the man, which embarrassed him, for he remembered that he had recently addressed that word to the lady of the house. Meanwhile, Mary smiled cordially and said, "Of course I bless you. You young people have pleased me today. I hope that soon I will hear the guests shouting bitter." "You won't hear that, because we will quietly sign without any celebration. We're not 18 years old enough to have a big party," Ashley said quietly, glancing at the groom as if to suggest that he agree with her. Jason did. Soon the marriage took place. Jason came to live with his wife. Ashley was happy that she had found her happiness as a woman because she truly loved Jason. Her husband reciprocated. Mary, looking at the newlyweds, only wished them long happiness and health. Imperceptibly after the wedding, 2 years flew by. The couple occasionally had a few misunderstandings between them, but it concerned all everyday things, something Ashley didn't have time to do around the house or Jason. And at such times the couple expressed their discontent with each other. But such spats were settled the same day, and the couple went to bed reconciled. Ashley was satisfied with everything in her life except one thing: she couldn't get pregnant. Every day she called herself an outcast more and more often. One day, coming home after her shift, she walked into her bedroom, threw herself on the bed, and burst into bitter tears. Her mother came to the crying and sat down next to her daughter. The elderly woman guessed the cause of her tears. She stroked her daughter's head affectionately and said quietly, "Why are you getting upset? Don't cry, my girl. Apparently it's not yet your time to be a mom." "What are you talking about? What time is it? I'm already 30. Soon I won't even know what pregnancy is. I know labor is when a baby is born. But what if my husband comes a year from now and tells me he has a woman expecting a child with him? I've been there before. What do you say to that, Mom?" "First of all, calm down. Don't think about your ex-husband. He probably didn't love you enough to look outside of you. And as for Jason, he's not that kind of man. Jason loves you. I can see the way he looks at you and would do anything to make you happy with him. If he's willing to do anything, why not get checked out by the doctors? I've told him that more than once, and Jason just looks at me with sadness," Ashley tearfully told her mother. "He looks that way because it's impossible to talk to you about this topic. Jason actually wants to get a checkup. There's nothing wrong with his health, but he's not talking about it for one reason only. Jason's worried that you're stressing yourself out about not being pregnant. That's your reason. Think about it. Why is your husband keeping quiet about the checkup?" Ashley stopped crying after her mother's words and thought for a moment. She was silent for a while, thinking about what she had heard, and then she turned to her mother, suddenly buried her face in her chest and said quietly, "You can't imagine how bitter I feel now. I thought I was suffering alone. But it turns out that you are also worried about me. And also, Mom, it's getting harder for me to go to work every day. Let's take today's case, for example. We had a young girl admitted a few days ago. She just turned 18. She gave birth to a boy today. And now she's giving up her son because her boyfriend doesn't want children. You know how jealous I am. You can't even imagine. She's lucky enough to be a mom. Even in a situation where her boyfriend doesn't want kids. I'd have a baby if I were her. I'd give the guy my resignation." That's what I told her today. But she told me to stay out of her personal life. "Daughter, don't try that girl's situation on yourself. You have your life, she has hers. Now try to just calm down or Jason will come over and worry about you." "Okay, thanks for the support." "I needed it," her daughter said quietly. Life slowly moved on. It had been 3 years since Ashley's wedding. The woman no longer hoped that she would ever become a mother, but she still had that hope in her heart. However, Ashley did not say it out loud. On the contrary, she told her husband more and more often that their family was incomplete. These statements only caused Jason more heartache, for he knew how much she dreamed of having children. When the conversation about the family being incomplete, Jason couldn't stand it and angrily asked his wife to shut up. Ashley, hearing her husband's tone, was frightened, because in such a way her husband had never allowed her to talk to him like that. When Ashley's first shock passed, the woman said, "All this is because I can't give you an heir. Stop it, please. That's not what I'm tired of. It's that you're making an issue out of the wrong place. I understand that you dream of having a child, as every woman does. But why do you keep talking about it? We've only been living for 3 years, which means we have to wait a while longer." Before the husband could finish his sentence, he was angrily interrupted by his wife. "Shut up. My first husband said the same thing to me." And what happened in the end? He found a woman who bore him a son. He didn't cheat while he was still married, all because I couldn't get pregnant. And that was the only reason I went to medical school to become a midwife back in the day. To find out the real reason why I couldn't have children. Wait, but you told me that your divorce was because, as they say, you didn't get along. I lied. And now you know the truth and you can roll. I'm not holding you, Ashley yelled hysterically. She was about to throw their family picture at her husband as her mother Mary entered the room. Mary gave her daughter a stern look and then quietly asked Jason to leave. The man didn't object and complied with his mother-in-law's request. Once the older woman was alone with her daughter, she sat up to Ashley and spoke softly. "Aren't you ashamed of throwing a tantrum here? I understand that you're nervous, but what does this have to do with your husband? You're torturing yourself and him. Do you want that? Enjoy your life. You love each other, and you'll still have a daughter, take my word for it." "But when, Mom?" "I said she will, so she will. We just have to be patient." I've heard those words many times before. How long do I have to wait? The gynecologist told me that everything is fine with my husband's health too. But I'm still not getting pregnant after saying that. Ashley abruptly got up from the couch and ran out of the room. Immediately she ran into her husband Jason, who was looking at her with a sad look. The woman walked briskly toward the exit. Jason wanted to follow, but his mother-in-law stopped him, saying, "Don't follow Ashley. Let her get some fresh air, let her calm down. And in a motherly way, I suggest you go to church with your wife and pray. Ashley's already been there. I suggest you both go. Trust me, Jason, it won't cost you anything." "Okay, Mary," Jason replied. Some time passed. Ashley was at work in a pensive mood. The woman's thoughts were preoccupied with the fact that her menstrual cycle had gone astray. Ashley's pensive mood was noticed by the doctor on duty and asked what was going on with her. Ashley was embarrassed by the question but still told what was bothering her. The medical officer laughed upon hearing the answer and said reproachfully, "I marvel at you, woman. Take you at least, Ashley. Where do you work?" "In a maternity hospital. A midwife." "Exactly. When symptoms like these arise, where should a woman go? And given that you're also a medical professional, what are your thoughts?" "Okay. You don't have to answer that. I can see by the look on your face that the answers to the questions have occurred to you. Let's go. I'd better check you out." After a while, Ashley came out in a happy mood. The doctor informed her that she was pregnant. Upon learning the wonderful news, Ashley immediately called her spouse and then her mother. Soon she was registered at the antenatal clinic. The woman spent the first trimester in the hospital. Then the pregnancy developed without complications. And soon Ashley gave birth to a baby girl at term. The newly married parents named their daughter Amber. The couple was in the seventh heaven of happiness that they had a child. Rejoiced at this event and Ashley's mother. The woman immediately noticed that after the birth of her daughter, as if blossomed. This was noticed not only by Mary but also by neighbors, who at every opportunity said to the elderly woman how Ashley has become more beautiful after the birth of her daughter. She's glowing from the inside out with happiness. "We're so happy for you." "Thank you," Mary replied, and immediately recited the Lord's Prayer to herself. The old woman was afraid that with such words people might inadvertently jinx her daughter's happiness. Meanwhile, Ashley was enjoying her new role as a mom. She enjoyed fussing with her baby, singing songs, putting on her baby's cradles, feeding her baby formula from a bottle. Ashley did her best to take care of her daughter, which sometimes frustrated her mother. Mary also wanted to nurse her granddaughter, so she would occasionally say to her daughter with a sad smile, "You're like a hen. You don't let anyone near you." and I am not a stranger to the baby. I want to babysit the baby too. Oh, Mom, Amber is my little angel, and I'm just afraid to part with her even for 5 minutes," Ashley replied. Time passed and the girl turned 3. Mary started talking about putting Amber in kindergarten. Ashley immediately flatly refused the offer, which caused her mother's bewilderment. The old woman looked at her daughter with incomprehension and said that the child needed to start contact with her peers. Ashley, hearing her mother's words, replied that she would go with her daughter to the playground where the kids were walking. Mary did not insist any further, realizing that Ashley would not be persuaded. After that conversation, a couple months flew by. Ashley walked with Amber in the public garden. The woman watched her daughter digging in the sand with her peers. Suddenly, Amber grabbed a child's shovel and knocked the girl on the head with it. The little girl cried and ran to her mother. Ashley felt bad about her daughter's behavior and approached Amber to reprimand her. Frowning her eyebrows, the mother said, "Girls." Ashley was outraged at her daughter Amber's behavior in the sandbox. She took the trowel from her and gave it to another girl, apologizing. Ashley then said the walk was over, which displeased Amber. At home, Ashley told her husband Ben what had happened. Mary, Ashley's mother, upon hearing the story, stated, "This is still the flowers. The berries will come later." "What you don't realize, Ashley, is that your daughter lives a reclusive life and thinks everything should be done just for her. You lack discipline, and as a mother, you're indulging your child in everything. Can't you see that the girl is turning into a little selfish girl?" "What are you talking about, Mom? Amber is a wonderful girl. You're just looking for faults in her that aren't really there," Ashley replied. Mary turned reproachfully to her son-in-law, Ben. "Why don't you say something? Amber is your daughter, too. Don't you notice anything strange about her behavior?" Ben grumbled and hurried away so as not to continue the conversation. In the evening, Ashley put her daughter to bed and then joined her husband in the bedroom. Maybe Mom is right about Amber growing up selfish. After all, sometimes she doesn't ask, she demands to buy this or that toy, she said thoughtfully. "I don't know what to answer. Maybe our daughter needs a little brother or sister," Ben suggested. "Well, let's do that now," he said with a smile as he hugged his wife. "Honey, I'm serious. Maybe we really should listen to Mom and put Amber in daycare," Ashley replied. "You know, I agree with that. Mary is retiring soon. Her allowance will be small. Our family budget is going to become quite paltry, and we need to repair the roof, its finances. If you get a job, we'll have extra income," Ben reasoned. A couple weeks later, Amber was enrolled in kindergarten, and Ashley went straight to work. At first, Amber was cranky and refused to go to daycare, complaining about her stomach or her leg. Lily believed it at first, but then realized that her daughter was being sly to avoid going to daycare. Ashley had a hard time convincing Amber to attend. When Amber stopped being cranky, other problems began. Caregivers complained about her behavior, saying she was acting arrogant and hurting other children. Ashley gave her daughter educational talks, but the complaints continued. Once again, when Ashley came to pick up Amber, the kindergarten teacher said Amber is an insufferable child. She doesn't get enough belt training. "What did you say? With a belt? Are you out of your mind? You have a teacher's education." Ashley was outraged. "How can you even mention the belt? I'm doing preventive counseling with my daughter at home. But you, too, should be helping me so that the girl adapts to her peers. Talk to the child and tell her that what she's doing is wrong. And if you and I do not find a common language, then I will have to appeal to your management." After this conversation between Ashley and the teacher, the complaints stopped, and after a while, Amber was eager to go to kindergarten. Life slowly moved on. Ashley now dreamed of having a second child. She wanted to give her husband an heir. However, time passed, and the woman could not get pregnant. One evening, Ashley talked to her mother and said that she dreamed of having a second child. Mary sighed sadly after her daughter's words and sadly said, "I'll let you in on a secret. Basically, Amber is your only child, and there won't be any others." "Why is that?" "It's because we're on our third generation of having only one child, and it's necessarily a girl. That was my grandmother's, then my mom's, and then mine. I wanted to have at least 3 too, but God gave me only you. It's an ancient prejudice. You could say it's a coincidence, though. Don't take hope away from me. I'm bound to have more. I'm sorry, daughter. I probably shouldn't have told you that. I don't want to take away your dream. I just thought you should know about it. The older woman sighed heavily and actually regretted her words. Time moved on imperceptibly, and it was about to be her 6th birthday when suddenly Mary felt sick. The woman was washing dishes in the kitchen when she felt a severe headache. The pensioner, writhing from the spasm, hurried to the kitchen cabinet, which stored medicines. However, the woman did not have time to get a pill, as she lost consciousness. Mary Ashley discovered Mary when she returned from daycare with her daughter. The woman, seeing her mother lying on the floor, cried out desperately and rushed to her mom. Amber, hearing her mom scream, cried frightened. Meanwhile, Ashley tried to bring the pensioner to her senses, but she was unsuccessful, and then she called an ambulance. Soon Mary was hospitalized. Ashley waited for the hospital with visits. She wanted to know what was wrong with her mother. When the woman went to the doctor once again, the doctor quietly said the cancer is brain cancer. I can't say anything else, as I am not a specialist in this case. I have other specifics. You need to get to a specialized clinic as soon as possible. How so? Whispered the woman, who couldn't believe what the medical professional had just told her. That same evening, Ashley told her spouse about everything. The couple began to consider where they could find a decent amount of money to travel to the regional city. Ben suggested taking out a loan, but his wife didn't refuse. Soon Mary was taken to the regional city by her daughter. The elderly woman lay for a while in the hospital, and then Ashley came for her, who hoped that everything was not so terrible. However, the doctor's words shocked her. Stage 4. So what's wrong with that? It's not like it's a verdict. People live at this stage. You told me you're a medical professional. It's not for me to tell you what stage 4 is. Yes, people live at that stage, but the only question is how long they live. There's one thing I don't understand about your situation. How could you, a medical professional, allow your mother to have such a neglected disease? Mom rarely complained of headaches, and if she did say she had a headache, she added that it was the magnetic storms. They affect her that way, Ashley replied, hiding her face in her palms and crying desperately. The doctor put his arm around the visitor and said, I understand your condition, but you should pull yourself together now, as you need to go to your mom. And I don't think Mary will be happy when she sees her daughter crying. Wait, shouldn't we go to the Capitol? The man in the white coat looked sadly at the lady, then shrugged his shoulders. And then the doctor went to the table, where there was a decanter, and poured water into a glass. And only after a few moments the visitor uttered, "Hope dies last." It's a folk saying. If it makes you feel better, go to Washington. They have better equipment there. But I'm not sure they'll give you a cure that'll get your mom back on her feet in no time. If I were you, personally, I would spend the money not to buy expensive drugs that won't help, but to make my mom's last days happy. Knew what she wanted and would fight to fulfill mom's dream. And if mom asks to prolong her life, then how would you fulfill your mom's wish? Ashley asked in a low voice and looked at the doctor point blank. The man hummed uncertainly, and after a few seconds he said, I'd buy regular vitamins at the drugstore and give them to my mom. But at the same time I would tell her that these vitamins prolong life. But you would not fulfill your mother's wishes, but only make an appearance. Sometimes the appearance is life-extending. Soon the lady picked up her mother from the hospital and came home with her. The woman told her husband about the conversation with the doctor, as well as the desire to go to Washington, to which the spouse replied, Don't you think the doctor was right when he said that the Capitol is unlikely to help anymore? You watch TV and see when celebrities are diagnosed with cancer, and public people spend fabulous money. And what's the result? Are you saying we should just give up and watch mom go quietly to the grave? I'm not saying that. Don't twist my words. I'm just trying to make the point that Mary should be at home, not in a hospital room. I don't know how much longer my mother-in-law has left to live, but I'd like her to feel peaceful and uncomfortable. All right, so be it. Mary lived only 2 months after her hospitalization. It happened early one morning when the sun was just coming out. The daughter, who had been sleeping with her mother lately, found out that the person she loved was no longer in the world. At first, Ashley felt guilty for not realizing in time when her mother complained of headaches. Ben tried to reason with his wife to stop tormenting herself. However, after such support, the woman went into a screaming fit. And when once again Ashley blamed herself for not looking after her mother, the head of the family said, "You're getting paranoid. Stop being hysterical and let it go. Don't you realize you're becoming toxic? It's all because of your speculation. You're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting me and my daughter. You don't understand anything. I'm a medical professional, and I should have responded to Mom's complaints. And I didn't. And as a result, Mom is no longer alive. It's my fault she passed away so early. Oh, honey, you're really getting on my nerves. Why don't you stop beating yourself up? I think you should take a vacation with your daughter right before Amber starts first grade. Get some rest and relaxation. I'd go with you, but I don't have vacation until October. What do you think of my offer?" asked the husband and hugged his wife, who was still sobbing. The woman only nodded in response. She no longer had the strength to argue with her husband. Soon Ashley and her daughter left on a trip to the Gulf Coast. The woman was glad that Ben had insisted on the trip. Ashley spent a week at the sea with her daughter, and now it was the last day. Before leaving, Amber asked her mom to go to the beach one last time to admire the sea. Ashley did not refuse the child, and soon mother and daughter were already walking barefoot on the soft golden sand. Every now and then the girl ran to the water to touch the water with her toe. Ashley was watching her daughter when someone called her name. The woman looked back in bewilderment and saw her ex-husband Jason walking toward her. Ashley stared at him in amazement. Jason approached the woman and said hello in a friendly manner before mouthing, "Taking a vacation. I heard from my sister that you have a daughter. Congratulations, you've been dreaming of having kids." "Thank you. So many years have not seen each other, although we live in the same city. But we met at the sea. Listen, let's go sit in a cafe and talk. You and I have a lot to remember. You haven't changed a bit since the baby was born. You're just as petite as before. I'd love to reminisce with you about our pranks in bed. Thank you for the invitation, but I must refuse you. My daughter and I are leaving today, and you'd be better off with your wife, because I have a man I love, and I'm not attracted to the side, unlike you," Ashley replied softly, disgusted by her ex-husband's tone about intimacy. Meanwhile, Jason frowned and said wistfully, "We're not making love to my wife right now. She's 2 months away from giving birth, and she's blown to smithereens. I told my husband to terminate the pregnancy. After all, there are already 2 children, and she said that she will give birth to a 3rd. So it's wonderful that you have so many children. Children are happiness. But I just don't understand why you walk on the beach without your soulmate and children. My wife's at home, and I'm here on business, like on a business trip. My father-in-law is a businessman, so he sent me down here for a couple days. Well, good luck with your business. We should get going with our daughter," Ashley said quietly and beckoned her daughter over to her. The woman took the girl's hand and they headed towards the exit of the beach. Ashley walked at that moment and thought how lucky Jason's wife was to already have 2 children and to be carrying a baby under her heart at this time. Soon Ashley and her daughter arrived home. They were gushing over Ben about what a wonderful time they had. Amber took a handful of sand out of her backpack to make her daddy happy. Ashley laughed when she saw it. Her husband looked at his wife in bewilderment, but she was even more amused when she saw Ben's amazed face. When the first emotions from the sand had passed, Ashley explained the reason for her laughter. She told her husband that she had hidden something in her backpack the night before she left. Ashley hadn't thought much of it at the time, but as she put her daughter's backpack on her shoulders, she wondered why it was so heavy. Ben, still not realizing anything, looked into his daughter's backpack and immediately chuckled, and through a fit of laughter turned to his daughter. "You wanted so much to please Daddy that you stuffed the whole backpack with sand. That's a good girl to please your father. So you were sunbathing in the sun like me and Mom. And now you can fill a trough with water, pour sand on the ground next to it. And it's like you're having a vacation at the sea. It's great, isn't it? You're so good at it." "That's a wonderful idea. And Jackson Sunshine, Daddy will give you a kiss for being clever." Life moved on, and soon it was time to go to first grade. On the eve of that event, Ashley put her daughter to bed and headed into the hall to iron her white apron. She spread the bedspread on the board and then laid the apron down thoughtfully and spoke softly. "How quickly time runs. You too. Our daughter is going to first grade tomorrow. As my mother used to tell me, it's worth it for a child to go to school, then time will fly by after that imperceptibly." "Is that you talking to yourself?" pronounced Ben, who had just entered the room and heard his spouse's phrase. "I'm saying that you and I are getting a little old now. And you know, my mom was right when she said that all women in our line give birth to only one child. And it's always a girl. Oh, that's so lucky. You and me were in the prime of our lives. And as for the one-child thing, that's just prejudice. That's what I told my mother. But you see, I can't get pregnant again." "That's all right. We still have a whole cartload of time. Drop what you're doing and let's go into the bedroom to make a baby," Ben said and winked excitedly at his spouse. Ashley smiled and said, "I was having a serious conversation with you." "And you're at it again?" "I'm being quite serious too. And about the kids, I can only say this: we have a daughter. And we should be happy about it. We need to get Amber on her feet so she can go to school and get a good life in the future." And so Amber has already started first grade. Her mother and father alternately took her daughter to and picked her up from school. The girl studied willingly, and soon parents often heard praise from the class teacher. Ashley and her husband were only happy. The first half of the year flew by. Amber became friends with a classmate. The girl's name was Christina. Friends spent a lot of time together. The parents of the girls were only happy about this friendship, which did not affect the performance at school. And now it was spring. The time of summer vacation was approaching. Amber came home alone. She had already been released to school alone after the winter. The girl came home and went to her room without greeting her mother, who was busy in the kitchen. Ashley was curious as to why her daughter had done that. The woman wiped her hands on a towel and proceeded to the nursery, where she saw her upset daughter. The homeowner approached the girl and asked what had happened. Amber glanced glumly at her mom and immediately, almost tearfully, said, "Christina, her parents bought her rollerblades, as well as a helmet, elbow pads, and knee pads. I want to go rollerblading in the summer too." "And what are you getting upset about? Daddy will come over and talk to him about it." "It's all words. Dad already promised me a bicycle." "And what? He bought a junk bike. It's a shame to even ride it in the yard. Dad bought me the bike I pointed out in the store, and then suddenly I needed another one. He said, ride this one first, and then you can get another bike. I don't need a bike now. I want rollerblades." In the evening, Ben came home from work, as his daughter immediately ran up to him and asked him to buy rollers. The head of the family, after a little thought, promised his daughter to make the purchase. Ashley heard the answer. The spouse did not interfere in the conversation between father and daughter. However, when Amber went to bed, Ashley emphatically stated that she was against the purchase. Ben looked at his wife in amazement and asked, "Why do you disapprove of rollerblading?" "She's too young for the sport. Amber is a girl, not a boy. It's more appropriate for her to play with her dolls, not run around on those rollerblades like tomboys everywhere." "Wait, honey, you know what kids are like these days. Girls only play dolls in kindergarten, and once they go to school, their priorities change. And anyway, how can you imagine our daughter's friend rollerblading and Amber looking at her with envy? It's a very interesting picture. And if Christina bought a live tiger tomorrow, would you run out and buy that animal for your daughter too? Why make it so complicated?" "Okay, if you promised your daughter, then buy the rollers. But I warn you right away that you will walk with Zlata when she starts to learn to ride them." "Whatever you say, my queen." Ashley ahed when she heard the sum. However, the woman glanced at her daughter, who was looking at the roller skates with wild delight. Afterward, Ashley smiled at her spouse and said, "Look at how happy our daughter is about these rollerblades. As they say, what's a little something for a child to be happy about? Okay, go outside and try out the accessories and then tell us about the progress." The time went on its own. At first, Ben accompanied his daughter and her friend on outings after work. And then, when Amber became more confident on rollers, the family decided that the girl would ride only in the park and never on the roadway. Amber happily agreed to this proposal, as she was already tired of her dad accompanying her. And Christina's father does not do it. June and then July flew by. Ashley was coming home from her shift. She rode on the shuttle bus and smiled as she recalled her day at work. Soon the driver announced a stop. The woman got out of the vehicle and headed to the nearest store to buy milk and eggs. Ashley was going to make an omelet for dinner. The woman had already approached the store when she heard her spouse calling her. Ashley turned around and asked what he was doing here. Ben smiled and pronounced, "I wanted to meet you from work, but I guess I didn't time it right." "There's something you're not telling me, honey. Spill what happened," the woman mumbled worriedly. Ben, seeing his wife's reaction, laughed and immediately said, "It's actually our boss's anniversary. He let everyone go home early, but I wasted my time and cooked dinner at home myself. And then I saw that there was no bread at home and hurried to the store, where I saw you. And I thought something had happened to my daughter," Ashley said, relieved. Then she smiled and said, "Let your boss have a holiday every day then. I'll be spared the cooking then." Imagine how happy that would be for a woman. "By the way, I forgot to ask, what did you cook?" "Flotsam pasta is my specialty. You know very well that cooking is not my business. That's what I have you for. Now you tell me how your day at work went." Ashley looked lovingly at her husband. Then she told him that she'd had a hard day at work. He asked why it had been tiring at work. Ashley smiled and said, "Although it's a hard day, it's a joyful one. A woman gave birth to triplets today. Imagine. She's 38 years old and this is her first labor. You should have seen this woman in labor when she was given her first baby in her arms. That woman's eyes were full of happiness. That's the first time I've seen eyes like that in so many years. And the funniest thing is that when she was transferred from the labor room to the ward, she began to wonder how she would feed 3 babies because she had only 2 breasts. Our medical staff, everyone who was in the ward, just fell down laughing. They found something to laugh about. If I were a woman, I might be interested in that question too. Although, I admire our woman in labor because she gave birth at 38. And you've given up on the whole thing. We should do the same thing tonight, as soon as we put our daughter to bed. And maybe don't even hint to me that you had a hard day's work or a headache. You won't get away from me today," he said with a smile. "Let's go home then. Can't wait to taste your specialty," said the wife with a laugh and took her husband under her elbow. And so it was already the end of August. School was a few days away. Amber walked up to her mom and asked to go for a walk. Ashley had the day off today. She glanced out the window and then turned to her daughter. "It's okay to walk, but just no rollerblades." Amber frowned and immediately inquired, "Why no rollerblades?" "The weather's turning bad. It's supposed to rain. Maybe you and Christina can sit with us today and play on the laptop," Mom replied. So much for Mom's idea. There were only a few days left until school started, and then there would definitely be no time to go for a ride. "Mom, let me go. Christina and I will skate carefully, as always." "Mom, you're the best in the world. My favorite. You know I can't refuse you when you ask me to. Go on, take a walk," said the woman and kissed her daughter on the top of her head. As soon as the girl jumped out of the door, the woman felt a vague uneasiness in her soul. Ashley was about to run out after her daughter and call her home when her cell phone rang. The woman was distracted by the phone call and then went out into the yard. But her daughter was not there, of course. It had been about 2 hours since Amber had gone for a walk. Ashley still felt a heaviness in her soul. The woman dialed her daughter and asked how they were doing. Amber cheerfully replied that everything was fine and immediately disconnected the connection. Hearing her daughter's voice made Ashley feel a little calmer. Another hour passed before Amber left for her walk. Ashley started the laundry. She pulled out her daughter's terrycloth robe as there was a loud knock on the door. At the same time, the woman heard Christina crying. Ashley hurried to the door, and as soon as she opened it, she saw Christina's crying face. The landlady asked anxiously, "What happened?" "Amber was hit by a car," she said through her sobs. "I came straight to you." "What do you mean, hit by a car? What are you talking about? Where's Amber?" "They took her away in an ambulance," Christina said through sobs. Ashley sucked in air with her mouth and then asked the girl where it had happened. When she found out where the hit and run had happened, The woman rushed to the scene of the tragedy without changing her slippers. When she got there, she saw a small crowd of gawkers, as well as a cordon of the place on the stretch of road. The woman, pushing people, rushed to the place. As soon as she got there, she saw the chalked silhouette of a child on the pavement, as well as brown bloodstains. Not far away, Ashley spotted a helmet. The helmet belonged to her daughter, and at the same moment the woman lost consciousness. Ashley woke up in the hospital. Sitting next to her was her husband Ben, who was holding her hand. As soon as Ben saw that his wife came to her senses, he immediately jumped up and ran out into the hallway, where he loudly called a nurse. A girl in a white coat hurried into the room. She approached Ashley and asked how the woman was feeling. Ashley waved her hand and wanted to get up. Her husband wouldn't let her. Then the woman asked her spouse, "What about your daughter?" "She's alive. Amber's in the ICU. The doctors are fighting for her life. Help me up. I need to be near my daughter. My presence will help her." "You just had a heart attack, and you can't get up," Ben said quietly but firmly. He wanted to add something else, but at that moment the doctor entered the room and came up to Ashley and said, "Are you awake? That's great. You're going to be given an injection, and then try to sleep. I'm not going to be here. Let's get you the papers you need to sign to refuse hospitalization." "Ashley, do I really need to tell you as a medical professional what the consequences of refusing medical care are?" The man in the white coat said sternly. "That's exactly what I know. That is why you should not waste your precious time now and explain to me the plain truths which I already know without you." The doctor looked at Ben after the woman's words, but he only waved his hands, thus making it clear that he could not influence his spouse in this situation. And after a while, Ashley was near the entrance to the intensive care unit. She prayed to God that her daughter would survive. Ben at this time stood near the window and looked at the sill with a hateful look. Some time passed. Ashley walked over to her husband and quietly touched his elbow. The husband immediately flinched at the touch and turned to his wife. He put his arm around Ashley and then pressed the woman's head against his chest and immediately felt her crying. Ben asked her to calm down, but the woman didn't respond to her husband's words. Ben became nervous. He was worried that his wife might have a second stroke. The man wanted to run after the nurse as he was stopped by his spouse, who faintly said, "Tell me what happened." "I can't tell you much." Anyway, the girls were already rollerblading home. They needed to pass the zebra. As here Christina had a slip on her lap, she bent down to correct it, and her daughter at the same time moved across the road, and then a foreign car flew out. Amber didn't have time to react and a hit and run occurred. Christina was saved from the collision by her knee pads. Witnesses called an ambulance and police officers. The investigator told me the driver fled the scene. But he's already been arrested. He was under the influence of alcohol when he hit our daughter. Ben was silent, looked at his wife, who only clenched her hands in a fist. The woman's face had gone pale. Ashley didn't say anything, she just stood there staring at one point. The man did not know how to behave in this situation, so once again pressed his wife to him and gently said, "Everything will work out, and our daughter will still recover." "I want that bastard to get the maximum punishment," Ashley told him. "That criminal will get what he deserves. Right now I think you should go home so you can recover." "No home, our little girl needs us here." "Okay, sweetheart." It was another couple hours before 2 doctors came out of the ICU. Ashley rushed over to them and grabbed one doctor by the chest. The man in the white coat tried to pull his hands off the woman, but he was unsuccessful. And then the second doctor turned to the lady's husband. "We did everything we could here, but the girl suffered many injuries. We couldn't save her." Ashley, as soon as she heard this, pushed the doctor away, then sobbed loudly. She then turned to her husband and started beating her fists on his chest, shouting, "It's your fault. It's your fault. I was against these videos. How am I supposed to live without my little girl?" One of the doctors quickly realized that the woman was hysterical. The man in the white coat shouted something to the nurse, who came out to the noise. The lady was given an injection and soon she fell asleep. Ben was next to his wife the whole time. and as soon as the spouse woke up, she asked to take her home. The man complied with the request without any objection. Amber's funeral soon followed. All this time, Ashley was in prostration. She did not understand why so many people had come to the cemetery, and also did not realize why those present were expressing their condolences to her. It wasn't until the coffin was being lowered into the hole that Ashley realized it was her baby girl being buried. The woman shrieked, ran to the coffin, wrapped both arms around it, and screamed, "Don't. I can't let my daughter go to her final resting place alone. I want to lie next to her." From the coffin, Ashley was able to tear Ben together with her father, who came to the funeral of his granddaughter. The woman was then picked up by neighbors and hurriedly taken away from the cemetery. At home, Ashley could not sit down at the table to memorialize her daughter as she became ill with heart trouble. Her spouse called an ambulance and the woman was hospitalized. Several days passed after the funeral. Ben visited his spouse daily, although it was a long drive. "We still don't know when the trial will be. Be patient, my dear, let's get better at my place," he told her. "Why should I get better if our daughter is no longer in this world?" Ashley replied. "I realize that we lost our only child, but don't forget that I need you, that I love you, and I can't lose you. And Amber wouldn't want that either." Some time passed. Ashley was released from the hospital and went to work. The days seemed like torture for the woman. Ashley hated the nights most of all, as sleep was non-existent. She had fleeting visions of her daughter coming to her and asking her to punish the man who hit her. Ben saw that his wife could not find peace until she knew what punishment the driver would receive, and soon the trial took place. As it turned out, that driver was some local oligarch. The defendant got off with a fine. It was twisted to mean that Amber was crossing the road in the wrong place. Amber's testimony disappeared from the case, and a whole new set of witnesses came forward. When Ashley found out about it, she went door to door with the D.A.'s office, the police, the DMV. But everywhere she was pointed at the door. The woman was desperate, and after another visit to the investigator, she came home and drank a few shots of whitewater. Ashley literally immediately became tipsy, as strong drinks were not spoiled. When her husband came home from work, her wife said to him in an inebriated voice, "How can you live peacefully in this world when our daughter is gone because of your fault? First of all, you, my dove, are drunk. Let's talk about it tomorrow when you're sober. I want to tell you everything now. You're not really a man. The man who ruined my daughter is out there, and you didn't even lift a finger to avenge him. What can I do when money rules the world now? Don't you understand that? What do you think I should do? Go to that oligarch and throw him from the 5th floor. Would that make you feel better? Only I'd have to go to jail for it, because I don't have the money to pay him off. I'd go and throw him from the 5th floor. Maybe then my daughter would stop coming to me at night." Ben did not say anything to his wife, only took the bottle of hot drink from her hands. And afterward, the man retired to the nursery to ponder how to help his wife overcome the loss of her only daughter. Sasha did not sleep all night, and the only thing that came to his mind was to take his wife to the bishop in the church, which he soon did. After the church visit, the lady was now less often visited by her daughter in dreams. Time moved on imperceptibly, and now a year has passed since Amber was buried. During this time, the lady had hardened a bit. Whereas she used to come to work in high spirits, now she disliked women in labor. The woman did not tell anyone about it, but the team has already noticed that Ashley often rudely treats future moms. The chief, Dr. Jackson Michael, repeatedly made his subordinate remarks on this matter. The woman promised to correct herself, but everything was repeated again. And once Ashley, together with the doctor, delivered a woman in labor. The young woman was in labor for the first time, and when the contractions began, she screamed that she was in pain. Ashley considered the future mommy hysterical, and the words of the doctor made remarks to her, and after the birth wrote a report to the chief doctor. Jackson Michael familiarized himself with the document and called Ashley to his office. As soon as the woman entered, the master of the office seriously said, "This can't go on any longer. If before, everyone wanted you to assist in childbirth, but now women in labor, just hearing your name, frightened. Maybe you should go to the sea with your husband, get away for a while." I understand your grief that you lost a child, but our patients are not to blame. Let's find some common ground, otherwise we'll go our separate ways, even though you're an excellent midwife. Now, I want an answer from you. I'm going to reconsider how I treat my patients. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. I've heard that before. Ashley, why don't you give me one last chance? Okay? You might want to think about taking a vacation. A change of scenery for a while is good for a person, especially in your situation. Ashley came home in a gloomy mood. She went into the kitchen to make dinner, but immediately changed her mind and went into the living room, where she turned on the TV. The woman didn't watch the program at all. She was thinking about how to continue going to work. Ashley was distracted from her thoughts by her husband, who sat down next to her and said affectionately, "How was your workday? A lot of women gave birth today? Why are you interested? Honey, what's the matter with you? Actually, I've always been interested in that. Then from now on, stop doing it. How I'm sick of everything. How I'm sick of everything," said the wife nervously. Ben frowned after his wife's words and then said firmly, "Tell me what happened at work." Ashley didn't talk herself into it twice, but honestly recounted the conversation with the head doctor. Ben was silent for a long time after his wife's narration, and then asked why she had developed a dislike for laboring women. Ashley thought for a moment, and then, looking her husband in the eye, confessed, "You know, I look at their happy faces when they're presented with a baby, and it's like I get an electric shock inside, and it's because they're moms, and I'm never going to get to experience that. It's moments like that when it's like I'm possessed. I can't help it. In that case, should you quit this job? You can't force yourself to do something you don't want to do. I get the impression that you've grown to hate being a midwife and find no outlet in this job." "What do you mean quit? Do you want me to sit in four walls and slowly go insane?" "I'm not suggesting you sit at home. You could get a job as a clerk in a small store. I think you'll be able to balance your debit and credit. Or maybe we should really go on vacation somewhere in the country, take a tent, fishing rods, and spend a week in solitude, and then think about changing jobs." "Okay, let's do that, honey." Soon the couple went on vacation to Ben's father's house in the country. The couple had a great time. They often went to nature, where they fished in the lake, and then together they picked berries. Ashley then confessed to her husband that it was a pity that they did not go on vacation when Amber was alive. The husband did not answer anything to his wife, as he realized that if he said a word, his wife would start crying. A week later, the couple went back. Ben, upon arrival, asked his wife if she could go out to work in the maternity ward. Ashley replied in agreement. The woman actually believed the trip had changed her internally, and soon Ashley was on shift. The first day was fine, but after a week the same feeling of resentment returned to her. Ashley tried to fight her envy. She even pinched her arm to keep from being rude. It had been about a month since the vacation. Ashley arrived at work and mentally wished to herself that there were as few women as possible wanting to be moms today. Ashley had no idea what a difficult shift she was about to have. And it had all started when Taylor Grievna, the doctor on duty, had her daughter's fever. The young woman asked, "Check to see if you can handle it on your own today, especially with 4 hours left in the shift. Just understand I am divorced from my husband, and there is no one to look after my daughter, and I'm worried about her. She's got a fever of 38.8. She called me the other day." Taylor Grievna, go with peace of mind. I've never delivered a baby on my own, have I? And there's someone to help you if you need it. The head doctor's on call today. By the way, did you ask him to leave? Otherwise he'll ask me and I won't answer, and I'll get in trouble. Yeah, I talked to him. He's a man of the world and he recognized my situation right away. He also said that if Ashley was working, there was nothing to worry about. That head doctor of ours is flattering me. All right, go ahead, Taylor Grievna. You'll be running an even higher fever by the time you get home to your daughter. Just as Ashley escorted the woman out, a nurse announced that there were 2 women in labor. Ashley sighed to herself and hurried into the exam room. There was one middle-aged woman in there who had been brought in by ambulance. Ashley began to ask the patient questions in a businesslike manner. Just then, the head doctor entered the room and addressed the midwife. "This is going to be fun today. You're taking care of this woman, and I'm about to have a difficult labor." Ashley sighed sorrowfully and hurried to examine the woman. As soon as she saw the patient's chart, she immediately shuddered in displeasure. The woman in labor, Rachel Lionel, was 58 years old. After all the necessary procedures, the woman in labor was taken to the labor room. Ashley was clearly giving commands as to how the patient should proceed. Rachel Lionel responded by moaning and begging for the baby to be saved. Ashley was angry with the woman, unable to suppress her anger. And when the woman in labor moaned again, the midwife said angrily, "You're crazy. How could you think of giving birth at the age of 58? Now keep quiet and do as you're told." The labor was difficult. Ashley was completely exhausted. She would have been happy to have the help of the chief of medicine. But Jackson Michael was delivering triplets, and he was having a hard time with it too. And when the workday was over, Ashley breathed a sigh of relief. Now the only thing she wanted to do was come home, take a bath, and go to bed. This day she even changed her principles. She called a cab to get to her place of residence. Previously, she had not allowed herself such expenses. Soon the woman was already at home, where she was met by her husband Ben. He offered his wife to eat, but she waved away and said that she did not want anything, as the day was stressful. Afterward, Ashley said she delivered a baby for an elderly woman. Her husband whistled in surprise and said in amazement, "I can't believe what kind of women we have here." The next day at lunchtime, Ashley received a call from the chief physician, who ordered her to report to work. The woman was often called by her superiors, so she involuntarily had a thought, and whether this call is not connected with yesterday's elderly woman in labor. There was no time to ponder, however, and Ashley drove to the hospital. As soon as she got to the second floor, where the chief physician's office was, a nurse ran up to her and whispered, "Ours is out of control, vomiting and swearing." "What's the reason? You know, he said something about the woman in labor yesterday." The girl in the white coat wanted to add something, but then the door opened and the head doctor appeared and said, "I was just waiting for you, Ashley. Come on, let's go have a talk." The first to enter the office was the chief physician, who stood by the desk, tapping his fingers nervously on it. Ashley came in after the man, and she knew from the doctor's demeanor that he was going to get a scolding, since he was rarely this angry. As the woman closed the door, Jackson Michael came right up to her and said sternly, "What are you doing? I am well aware that today both you and I have a day off after yesterday's duty, but I get a call from a doctor saying that a woman in labor wants to get to know me. I wouldn't have responded to this request if I hadn't been told who this woman was. Do you happen to have any idea who this woman might be?" "I do," Ashley replied. "Rachel Lionel Kopylova gave birth to a baby girl." "That's right. When I went to see her, she was curious about the midwife who delivered her baby. Naturally, I asked what was wrong. Rachel wouldn't tell me what the situation was, but it was clear she wasn't happy about what you'd done. And now I'll tell you for your understanding that this woman in labor is the wife of a very famous man in the regional city. And if now we are tortured with checks, the stumbling block will be you, because your tongue says nasty things. I'd like to add that if I fire you, your husband will get it too, and so will I for that matter." "Wait a minute," Ashley said. "If this lady is the wife of a respectable man, why did she come here to give birth? Why didn't she give birth in her own town?" "You're asking me these questions?" The head doctor was indignant. "You don't understand the seriousness of the situation. I'm not interested in why Rachel ended up in our hospital." Ashley was more concerned with the aftermath of her shift. She wasn't going to rant about it. You go on your knees and beg for forgiveness, birthing girl. Basically do whatever it takes to earn her favor. The doctor gestured toward the door, letting her know that the conversation was over. Ashley walked out of the office. Her face was burning. The woman didn't know how to start a conversation with the woman in labor, whom she had insulted. Nevertheless, Ashley pulled herself together and headed toward the room. She knocked on the door and then entered. Immediately, her attention was caught by the way Rachel Lionel was admiring her newborn daughter. Ashley hesitated, letting her know she was in the room. She turned at the sound and looked at the midwife intently. "I want to apologize to you," Ashley spoke first. "I behaved inappropriately with you yesterday. I'll get down on my knees if you want me to." but please forgive me. I didn't know whose wife you were." "Don't clean it. Are you saying that if I were the wife of a locksmith or a janitor, you wouldn't feel guilty about talking to a woman in labor like that?" Rachel Lionel said sternly and looked reproachfully at the midwife. Ashley at that moment was ready to fall to the ground in shame, because she realized that she had said something stupid. But she answered nonetheless. "I wouldn't feel guilty." "Well, thank you for your honest answer. If you lied now, I'd lose the last shred of respect for you. Now tell me, why are you so rude to women in labor? Don't deny it, since I've been doing a little checking up on you around here." Ashley looked at Rachel with a sad look, and then tears ran down her cheeks. The midwife, without knowing why, told this woman how she had lost her baby, that the perpetrator had gotten off scot-free after the hit and run, and told her that she dreamed of becoming a mom, but it wasn't happening. Therefore, when women of advanced age give birth, she is filled with anger and envy. Rachel listened attentively to the interlocutor. Then she smiled sadly. She invited the midwife to sit down next to her, then took her hand and asked her to stop crying. Ashley wiped her tears away with the palm of her hand. While smearing mascara on her face, Rachel immediately held out a damp washcloth with the words, "Are you now, like a lost sheep, aware of our fate? Related. At one time, I couldn't get pregnant for a long time either. And when it did happen, it was a miracle for me and my husband. My husband at that time was still a small official in the administration. And then my son grew up and against parental will, after serving in the army, went to the hot spot. My husband and I hoped that the trouble would pass us by. However, the miracle did not happen. Our boy died. We could not recover from this tragedy for a long time. But as they say, time heals. My husband moved up the career ladder, and that's when I had the idea that I could still have a child. I was examined in many clinics, but the doctors were throwing up their hands. And then came the decision to do IVF. My husband and I consulted. He is 7 years younger than me, and we came to a mutual agreement that we could take a risk. And the risk justified our expectations. We have a daughter. The main thing is that our health should be good." Ashley sat in silence after Rachel's story. The woman's story had touched something in her soul. Meanwhile, Jackson Michael paced nervously around the office, wondering if Ashley had made amends, and unable to bear it, the man strode into the room, where he saw a peaceful conversation between the women, who smiled at each other. The chief physician came out in bewilderment. The only thing he realized was that the conflict was over. Meanwhile, Ashley smiled embarrassedly and asked the question she had been wondering about the late pregnancy. "It's understandable. I'm happy for you, but I just don't understand why you came to give birth in a provincial town." "I didn't really want to come here," Rachel answered Lionel. But immediately, becoming serious, she continued. "My husband went on a business trip to New York. I was against this trip, but my husband is still an enthusiast, likes to be in the know. My spouse was away for 2 days and should have been back by now. Then I got the call that he had a heart attack. I could not stay at home and drove myself by car to that city. However, the nervousness had taken its toll. I felt the baby wanted to be born, so your town came up. And in the morning my husband called and said that he is doing well and he will be here soon. I had to scold him and scare him that if he leaves the hospital without permission, our daughter will be taken away from the hospital. My blackmail succeeded. What a brave woman you are." Ashley said with admiration. "I'm not brave. I just love my husband as much as he loves me. And yet I envy you, but with white envy. I mean, you realized your dream and became a mom. Can you do it too? You're a midwife and you know what IVF is." "I do, but I'm afraid my husband wouldn't like it," Ashley said quietly. "And that's where you're wrong. From your story, your husband loves you and would do anything to make you happy. My advice is to go for it. Just don't hurt any more women in labor. I give you my word it won't happen again. Meeting you and your story changed something in my soul. And you know I'm very happy about it.